What's going on, gamers? It's your boy Richie Bon, and welcome to the second ever CGC Draft League live draft announcement and analysis. My name is Richie Bon, aka Richie Bon Gaming, aka Richie, but I am not alone.
He's joined by Gentleman Garvey. Hello.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here for this momentous occasion. The second time we've ever done this. Look at us. We've come so far. I won't keep the suspense any longer. We're going to just jump into revealing all of the teams, which we've done so on Twitter throughout the week. Then we're going to go over the rules, and then we're going to go over the draft. Our first array of teams that you see here in no particular order are the Sudbury Snom, coached by The Keenan, aka Unclaimed Room on Twitch. We have the Treasure Town Togepies, coached by Kira's Corner, formerly Princess Kira XO. Delightful. We're so glad to have them. We got the New Jersey Jirachis, coached by Hey Boy Blue. We got the Peachy Pikachu with Coach Kamihata, aka Liz, and we have the Colorado Cramorant, which is my team.
Also joining us for the first time, coming out from the front office, is the Portland Timbers with DJ Sugar at the helm. We also have the New England Nido Kings, obviously one of those teams in there, coached by Mike ABC. I'm totally not in their front office. We also have the Wind and Dragapults featuring the Golden Cosmos, aka Jack. Hopefully you caught him in his amazing run at Liverpool. We also have the Milk Biting Mousehole featuring the amazing Curious Cleffa. And of course the Sherwood Berry Bandits, rebranded from Squids, returning to us from the last draft league.
We got 4 more for you. There's the Toronto Tinkaton featuring Juggernaut HQ as the coach. This is his first ever endeavor into anything competitive in Pokemon. Dedicated shiny hunter, never tried competitive before, thought, why not? I'll do a draft league. Can't wait to have him. We have Cotton returning from the first season partially, coach of the Sydney Sylveons. We have the Windy City Whimsies coming back, coached by Serene Grace. And last but not least, the Glimwood Glimmets are taking their first stab at draft league as well, featuring Lady Delmora. Garby, you want to go over the draft rules real quick?
Absolutely. So, the draft rules are pretty much the same as we ran last time, so if you're familiar with the previous draft league. But for those of you that aren't, the draft rules, we randomly generate a snake draft pick order. The coaches will then go through a draft order process that we went through over the course of about 2 weeks, and drafted a bunch of different Pokemon, upwards of 10. The coaches may draft their roster in any order they like. Only one form of the Pokemon per team. So, for example, if you have the Rotom forms, all the appliances, you can only get one of the appliances. Then you're limited to one Paradox Pokemon per team, so we couldn't have people just drafting a bunch of Paradox Pokemon. And then each of the team gets 6 free picks of these different orders, plus 4 additional picks that they purchase with a budget. So the free picks are, you get 1 for A, 2 for B, 2 for C, and 1 for D, followed by our 50-point budget, with the A tier being 20 points, B tier being 15, C tier being 10, and of course the D tier being 5. The entire tier list was drafted as a collective, so everyone had opinions and consensus on how it goes, and we finalized the roster, and then the draft began, so that way they can pick their budget appropriately. So I'll toss it back over to Rich for the battle rules.
Excellent. Yeah, let's take a look at those. All Pokemon are set to level 50. We're doing VGC style, which means that it's double battles, but it's a best of 3. You have 6 Pokemon on your team, but you bring 4. So that's rosters of 10. To each matchup each week, you bring 6. And then in each individual battle, in the best of 3, you bring 4. Item clause, where we are respecting, where you only get 1 type of held item per Pokemon. You can't put a choice scarf on every single Pokemon. It's got to be unique items. Out of the 14 teams, we're taking them randomly divided into 2 divisions of 7, with a 6-week long season, followed by a top 8 playoffs. It's actually a 7-week long season, and every team at 1 week will eventually have a bye. So there was some math that we had to sort out there, but it's all taken care of now. Forfeiting one of your games will result in an automatic -1 differential. This is more of a punishment than just forfeiting normally is, where you lose. For Draft League, that means you lose a little bit harder. The reason why this is because preservation of information is really important for closed team sheet draft leagues. So if you're going to just forfeit because you want to keep a secret, you're going to have to pay for it, and it's really going to have to pay off for you to win the overall best of 3. EVs, held items, moves, and abilities cannot be changed between matches in a best of 3, but you are more than welcome to change them between your weekly matchups. And in the event that Pokemon Home is added, the rules will not be changed. In fact, Greninja is being added this weekend, and we decided not to put it on the draft list, despite the fact it is playable. We're not adding it. So any other Pokemon that get added during the course of the season, we aren't going to be changing the draft at all. Garby, do you want to go over the snake draft order?
Absolutely. So like we said, it was a randomly drafted order, so no biases involved with it, just completely random. So we started with the Sudbury Snom, followed by the Treasure Town Togepis, Peachy Pikachus, then the New Jersey Jirachi, then the Portland Timbers, followed by the Winded Dragapult. Right in the middle here, we have the New England Nidokings. The Milk Biting Mousehole followed them up. Then we had the Sherwood Berry Bandits, the Colorado Cramorant, the Toronto Tinkatons, the
Sydney Sylveons. Yeah.
Sylveon. I was like, oh my god, I was
There's
trying
no
to read the label. I was like, oh my god, no text. Then the Windy City Whimsies, and then followed by the Glimwood Glimmets.
Fantastic. Here's the draft tier list, and this is where Garby and I are going to say goodbye from our face cams. So it was great seeing you all, but we're going to dip away so you can get a good look at all of this and all the upcoming information. So not going to describe each one of these choices obviously in detail, but if you want to take a quick look, this is the tier list that we decided. This was done fully as a group. Everyone in the draft, maybe if they weren't able to make the call live, they reviewed it over the course of a week. We all decided that this was an appropriate tiering for our league. You do not see D tier featured, and D tier is just everything that is not here. And with that, we're going to begin round one. Why don't you take away the very first pick of the draft, Garby?
Okay, so the very first pick of the draft from the Sunbury Snom was Kilowattrel, a surprising right out the gate B tier pick. Normally you would expect somebody to start picking up power picks to the A tier, but this is a legendary pick for really rounding out your team. Kilowattrel, outside of like the big emphasis on the Tailwind aspect of this, it's one of the premier Tailwind setters and one of the fastest. Just one base point shy of Talonflame, one of the fastest Tailwind setters we've ever seen in any format, let alone just this one. It also sports, even though it has some pretty like lacking in bulk, it supports a very, very high 105 special attack. And being that it's a really powerful Tailwind setter with abilities such as Wind Power, it can go crazy just firing off the Tailwind and then just start spitting out electric attacks. It also has the option to go competitive, so it can protect the rest of your lineup from things like Intimidate. So this thing is a very well-rounded, well-thought-out pick, especially for a B tier to jump on that early. So really smart pick by them right out the gate.
Our second pick is Kira's Corner with the Treasure Town Togepis with Fluttermane. I think everyone knew this thing would go round one. There was no question that Fluttermane was a super hotly contested pick. As you can see, based on its stat total here, those last three stats, special attack, special defense, and speed, go absolutely crazy. Not to mention that Photosynthesis, either with Sun or Booster Energy, can boost that even further. This is a true offensive powerhouse, and again, no surprise to see it go so early.
Speaking of no surprises going early, we got the Peachy Pikachus with the Roaring Moon pick. Roaring Moon, just on its base stat total alone, is a absolute monster. But then it gets even crazier when you look at its speed and attack. This thing has crazy offenses without even considering its ability or its potential in Sun. It's just going to hit really hard. It's one of the defining things in Series 2 right now for those of you who have been playing Series 2 VGC. It's not live yet, but on Showdown, people have been going crazy with it, and Roaring Moon is just a premier pick in that format, and no surprise at all that it got picked up. Doing things like, of course, you have the Dragon Dark type that can give some issues, especially with our previous pick was Fluttermane, can give it some problems, but thanks to Terra typing, that's not an issue at all. And there's really cool movesets that utilize its Terra typing in very unique ways. So this thing is going to pop off for sure, and I'm really excited to see it in this draft.
Up next, we got the New Jersey Jirachis with arguably one of the best possible support picks you can get in a draft league. It's Grimmsnarl. We all saw what Grimmsnarl did in Gen 8, and it's just absolutely devastating how powerful this thing is. And further considering, when you see conventional VGC Grimmsnarls, they are almost always, 99% of the time, fully dedicated to support. What's really interesting and fun and unique about Draft League is that I guarantee you, Hey Boy Blue is not going to bring a support Grimmsnarl at least 1 week. It's going to be offensive, because it has such a decent attack stat, fantastic typing. This mon is really exciting, and furthermore, also, you always see Prankster in traditional VGC. Frisk and Pickpocket are both really, really cool for niche scenarios. So overall, really fantastic pick by the Jirachis, and I can't wait to see what they back it up with as far as their offensive line.
Next up, we have one of my personal favorite Gen 9 picks for sure, and that's Iron Bundle. So Iron Bundle, easily the best glow up of a Pokemon coming from previous generations, from Delibird to this monstrosity of a Pokemon. Like, we were talking about Rory Moon and Fluttermane. This is another like current meta-defining Series 2 Pokemon. And it's just going to run through some lineups if they're not prepared for it. Having an amazing combination of Hydro Pump and Freeze Dry to pretty much cover most of its issues, and having this blistering speed tier on top of a very high special attack, and Loki is surprisingly very good defensive stat. This thing is just statted extremely well for an offensive Pokemon, and will absolutely go insane through a lot of different teams if they're not ready for it.
The Wind and Dragapult's picking up one of the Series 1 biggest villains, that is Golden Go. What a ridiculous Pokemon. Not only are its stats great, not only is its typing great, but it gave it a spread version of Overheat that is Steel type that only drops your special attack one stage. And it's immune to all status moves. What were they doing? This is absolutely silly, and I do not blame Cosmos and the Wind and Dragapults from picking this up at all. Easily one of the best Steel types that you can possibly get. What a ridiculous Pokemon, honestly.
One of the next like sleeper Pokemon coming to the forefront has been Pelipper. Pelipper is a defining rain Pokemon, especially with the absence of Politoed, so it's no surprise there that someone will be able to jump on the weather train really early to start really rounding out their draft. And the New England Nova Kings, they just jumped right on it. Picking up Pelipper really defines the rest of your draft in terms of like really building into rain, but it also stops people from actually grabbing up this strategy and capitalizing on it. Pelipper is an amazing support to bring forward some really powerful Pokemon, such as the new Palafin, or, for example, any Swift Swimmer that's been highlighted this generation with the new moves like Wave Crash. A lot of Swift Swimmers can go pretty insane and go crazy through lineups. So this is a really cool way to really not really pigeonhole yourself like you would think, but it helps you diversify the draft. So Pelipper is a really smart pick really early on. And honestly, it's a steal being a B tier. It could have been an A tier. It's just an insane Pokemon, so amazing pickup here.
Then Curious Cleffa with the Milk Biting Mousehold had to get Mousehold. It's the mascot. You can't deny that from them. Look at these guys. They're adorable. The stats don't seem that impressive besides the speed, but when you get down to the nitty gritty, if you've played VGC at all, you know what this thing does. Part of its strength is just how insanely flexible it is. And then on top of that, they gave it a signature move that hits 10 times, that's Technician boosted and Sharpness boosted, weirdly. I don't know if we'll see that strat coming out of Cleffa, but who knows. Besides that, you can run a supportive set with Friend Guard, Follow Me, Super Feign, all sorts of supportive moves. It has one of the fastest natural Thunder Waves in the format, I believe. What a just a silly mon, and it's so great that it just happens to be the mascot of this team as well.
Next up, we have a VGC classic. So the Sherberry Berry Bandits, they picked up Arcanine in the A tier. Often thought of as the Incineroar we have at home, Arcanine, in fact, is way better than that and has amazing tools in addition to its Intimidate. Intimidate's something that's pretty rare this generation, and it's something that can always be used on a team, especially if there are drafters that didn't pick up something with Defiant on it. The Intimidate can really shut down those physical attackers, and in addition to that, having access to Will-O-Wisp and other supportive tools is really great, but what often gets unsung is Arcanine's offenses. A base 110 attack stat is nothing to like sleep on at all. And just choice banding this thing, and especially with access to something like a Terra Normal Extreme Speed, Arcanine is both an offensive threat and a supportive threat and can be really diverse in a draft setting. This is like perfect for any sort of format like this, and it's just a great Pokemon. Very flexible pickup and very impressive for a first round.
Up next, the Colorado Cramorant, coached by yours truly, picking up Dragapult. I was just hyping up how great it was that the Milk-Biting Mousehold could get their mascot, and I feel sad for depriving this from the Golden Cosmos and the Wind and Dragapults. But I had to do it. One staple, in my opinion, of Draft League is that speed tiers are very important. They're excessively important when you know how fast your opponent's Pokemon are and how much speed you really need to invest. If you're running Dragapult in a traditional format, you're probably going to want its speed to be, if not maxed out, pretty high. In a draft format, I can see my opponent's teams and choose exactly how much speed I want and outspeed even some Choice Scarf Pokemon with it, which I think is just such awesome flexibility that then allows you to dump into its bulk or its offensive stats. You can run it physical attacker, special attacker, or support, and I'm just so excited to have this mon on my team, and I can't wait to see what it does as the leader of all the mons in the Colorado Cramorant.
Next up, another amazing dragon. And pretty much one of the heroes of Series 1. It is Hydreigon. Hydreigon, being a Dark Dragon type, normally was crippled by fairies after its debut generation, but in this gen, being able to shift your type out has been really beneficial to some of these Pokemon that have crippling weaknesses, but amazing strengths. A base stat total of 600. This thing is an absolute monster, especially with that base stat of 125 special attack. It absolutely goes insane, has a very diverse array of very aggressive sets that it can run, from choice specs all the way up to we've seen people running focus energy with a scope lens, just critting for days. This thing absolutely is an offensive powerhouse and a monster, and also sports a nice tailwind support on top of it. It's just a very flexible, aggressive pick, and is going to do wonders in this draft league, especially abusing Gen 9's new mechanic. It's the poster child of Terra typing, in my opinion, and a great pickup.
Up next, a fun Paradox Pokemon, the first B tier one that we've seen drafted. The Sydney Sylveons picked up Screamtail. Speaking of glow-ups earlier from Iron Bundle, this is a huge one for Jigglypuff. Its stats it jumped enormously. It's impossible to describe. While this thing can't really do any damage, 65 attack, 65 special attack, not really the highest, its support capabilities are immense. It is incredibly fast, incredibly bulky, can't take it off the field, and it's gonna annoy your opponent to no end. I'm really excited to see what Cotton does with Screamtail.
Something else I'm really excited about is this next Pokemon pick. The Tatsugiri. Grache always struck me, especially from last league, as the villain of the entire draft, and they just continue that trend now with picking up probably one of the most villainous picks of the entire draft in the Tatsugiri. If you know anything about VGC going into this, Dondozo and Tatsugiri have been running rampant across the ladder, and this is just kind of one of those things that strikes fear immediately into a draft as soon as it starts. You just put the fear of God into everybody in that draft, being like, oh no, wait, is someone going to have to pick up Dondozo to stop this madness? And who knows, maybe someone will, but they really need to. Otherwise, this duo, if put together, is an absolute menace for any draft that is going forward here. So Grace automatically putting the pressure on, and I love to see it. It was so exciting to see this right out of round one. It's just really terrifying to deal with. So hopefully someone addresses it going forward, because now they have to answer it. It's really cool to see.
For the last pick of round one, we have the Glimwood Glimmets picking up another powerful Paradox Pokemon, Iron Moth. Sick design, first of all. Second of all, incredible stats. I think it has the highest special attack in the format. I can be corrected, potentially. But its other stats are great as well. Just gotta patch up that defense with some good support mons on the team, and Drew are taken care of. Fire and Poison is devastating against Fairy types, which are in pretty high demand since there's not that many good ones in this format. So having something that just sits in front of them so easily is just so impactful. This gets Acid Spray as well, which not only is with that special attack is actually doing decent damage, but it can support the rest of your team as well. I'm sure Lady Delmora is going to be able to rock with Iron Moth. Now, Garby, let's just do a little overall recap. If I may collect your thoughts about the round one picks, what do you think overall?
So obviously we saw a lot of powerhouse picks. You saw the Fluttermane, you saw the Roaring Moon, you saw the Tatsugiri, you saw some other, like, there's a whole collection of dragon types just getting scooped up in round one. Dragon types were in high demand this coming generation because of Terra type and being able to shift out of it. But you did see a lot of surprising support picks too, even in the very first pick of the draft being in that Kilowattrel. Just that emphasis on that support Tailwind. You have the Pelipper getting picked up. You have the surprising, honestly, Screamtail getting picked up as well. I'm excited to see that with its diverse support pool. The support picks being in the first round is just a really interesting way to start drafting, because you would think that a lot of people would go for those offensive powerhouses, but sometimes it's good to just swoop in for nice supports right under the nose of people while they pick up those crazy powerhouses, because there's plenty of power to go around.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of just high base stat totals in Gen 9, and I, like you, I was just surprised to see such a diversity in tiers. Of course, there's just A and B, but still, and roles as well. Just very impressive. Kilowattrel being the very first pick totally caught me off guard. I would have never have guessed that Kilowattrel would have been the first one to go. I was expecting the second or third pick that we have here to be the first, being Fluttermane or Roaring Moon, but overall really neat. And as you said, I think the supports coming out are really cool. I think Grimmsnarls and Screamtail, and to an extent Mousehold. But additionally, my favorite part of this is the two picks that like really offer a whole, what's the word, just a really distinct mode for their draft, and I'm thinking of Pelipper and Tatsugiri. Those two mons are just going round one, just really solidify a potential strategy that's going to be really, really powerful that requires those Pokemon to work. So I just wanted to note those two picks in particular, I think were really, really smart round one picks. That being said, let's jump into round two. As Snake Draft works, our last pick goes first every other round. So that being said, let's jump into Lady Delmora picking up Tauros Blaze. The new Tauros forms are incredible, and this one is no exception. Fighting Fire is a really great type. This thing has excellent stats, excellent abilities. Sure, 2 fire types at the start of the draft for the Glimwood Glimmets, but there's nothing wrong with that. These are 2 of the best fire types in the game, without question. Again, this is just a really great Tauros form, just a really great Pokemon in general. Can be supportive, can be offensive. You can break screens with it. It's just super useful overall. And Intimidate plus Will-O-Wisp, that's pretty scary. Can't wait to see what the Glimmets do with this one.
Yes, another menace drafted by Grache. Grache continues to be the villain. I consider Masquerada to be another one of those big staple VGC big bads. So you had the Dondoza Tatsugiri is now putting on that pressure and immediately drafts one of the things that actually is really good at beating it. It's just an incredible, like, powerful strategy going forward into the draft. And this is just going to be continuous excitement to see from Grache, just continuing to draft this big menacing team, these big bads going forward. And I love that storyline for them. So it's really cool to see.
The Sydney Sylveons pick up King Gambit, one of the 4 really cool, really awesome new evolutions they gave to older Pokemon in this generation. Easily one of the best available steel types. It rocks well with Terra. It has so many good terrestrializations. You can run it with Assault Vest, you can run it with Life Orb, you can run it with, I'm sure, all sorts of stuff that we haven't even considered in traditional VGC meta that Cotton is already thinking about. All of its abilities are cool. Honestly, if anyone was going to make use of pressure in this draft, I think it would be Cotton. I think the fact that Cotton picked up a really good mon with pressure, I think, is actually really something to be worried about. Defiant and Supreme Overlord are obviously really good on their own rate as well. This thing is kind of slow, but Cotton already has a Trick Room setter, and besides that, it gets Sucker Punch. So what a great A tier for the Sylveons to pick up.
Moving down to the B tier, but definitely no slouch. It is Tinkaton. So Toronto picking up their mascot had to obviously do it sooner rather than later, of course. This thing sporting the dreaded Fairy Steel type that was a menace last year in the form of the last generation in the form of Zacian. While the base stats don't really support it as much of a menace, that incredible typing, really good abilities, and access to a signature move, Gigaton Hammer, a base 160 steel attack, this thing will hit pretty hard. Even if Gigaton Hammer has the drawback of only working every other turn, it still can hit really hard, has access to things like Fake Out, and has incredible typing. This is a very, very kind of slept on and very powerful Pokemon. So while it's pretty one note in terms of what it's going to do, it's going to do that so well on a team that it makes it really scary to deal with. You have to have a plan going into Tinkaton, or it could ruin your entire day, especially going into a matchup against it. So I really like this pickup, not just for the sake of it being a mascot, but because it has such good ability.
Up next is the next Colorado Cramorant pick. I decided to pick up a Paradox Pokemon. A lot of the really powerful ones were going. I thought it's time for Iron Valiant. Again, harkening back, a decision to this was very similar as the one I made for Dragapult. The speed is huge. Not only is this incredibly fast, but it's also about 30 points slower, well, closer to 20, but 30 points slower than Dragapult. So just having those speed tiers in mind, and considering the fact that Iron Valiant has so many other stats that you want to dump EVs into, just seems really, really practical to me to use. It has an incredible physical move pool, special move pool, utility move pool. It might have the deepest move pool in the whole draft, as I mean, maybe just useful moves, but still, this thing is really, really crazy. It's a double dark resist too, which is also really useful for being a Dragapult teammate. And, you know, just having the beginnings, the building blocks of a fantasy core, being a dragon type, a fairy type, and a steel type, is something that I think not only in my draft, but we'll see in a lot of drafts in general.
Continuing the trend of picking up Paradox Pokemon, the Sherwood Berry Bandits picked up Brute Bonnet. The Amoonguss replacement for this generation in a lot of ways that people thought it would be. While different than Amoonguss, it is incredibly powerful. You look at that base 127 attack, that's something Amoonguss can't really say that it really has. Sure, it lacks Regenerator, which does take away some bulk, and the Grass Dark type can be a little shaky at times in comparison to Amoonguss, but this thing brings something that Amoonguss cannot, and that is actually hitting really hard. It is a scary mushroom that hits really hard, and having that dark type in this generation has been incredibly important. So just having access to things like Sucker Punch while still having access to Spore puts a crazy amount of pressure and diversity, and it's not nearly as linear as you would expect something like Amoonguss to be that is going to have those same core staple moves a lot of the time. So Brute Bonnet has a very shocking move pool, despite the fact that it's quote-unquote an Amoonguss clone, and I'm definitely excited to see what they utilize in its move kit week to week. It's going to be really cool.
Up next, the Milk-Biting Mousehold pickup Iron Jugulus, yet another Paradox Pokemon, the third one in a row in the draft. A lot of people look at this and say, it has less base stats than Hydreigon, how good can it be? But in all honesty, Dark Flying's a pretty great typing. Defensively, it's got a lot going for it. Offensively, it hits a ton of things for neutral and super effective damage. Overall, just a really powerful Pokemon, and I'm really excited. This works offensively, this works as a Tailwind setter. I'm sure that there's tons of techs that this thing can do just based on its move pool alone, and I'm really excited to see what the Mousehold will do with it.
One of my favorite Pokemon this generation. We've been loving it in my little team building chat that we got going on with Rich here, and it's been the Farigiraf. The Farigiraf is honestly just an incredible Pokemon. It has a surprisingly high HP and base special attack, and despite the fact that it looks like it has some pretty middling bulk in its defenses, it takes a lot of hits really well. Having access to that Armor Tail as well is just an incredible thing to have for a Pokemon that, by the way, can set Trick Room. So you can't fake this thing out. It's really hard to deal with priority. You can't use any priority moves against it. And on top of that, it has this offensive pressure in addition to after it finishes Trick Room that it just it's just a really powerful Pokemon and a really powerful tool to have moving forward. So if you're looking to have some Trick Room strategies, the Nidokings have a Tailwind setter and also a Trick Room setter. So the speed control is really coming together very quickly for them. And I'm excited to see what is in store for the rest of the draft.
Here it comes. Another ridiculously powerful ghost type coming out of Gen 9 gets picked up by the Wind and Dragapults. It's Annihilape. I really think Primeape deserved an evolution, but they might have taken it a bit too far. Not only is this thing ridiculously bulky, it has the strongest Final Gambit out of any Pokemon. It's ridiculous how strong Rage Fist is. I can't understate how silly that move is. It can go up to 300 base power, and Annihilape remembers how many hits it's taken when it switches out. It is just silly. I'm sure that there's a lot of sets that this Pokemon can run that we haven't seen in VGC that the Wind and Dragapults are going to be able to pull out and show us. I'm really excited to see what happens with Annihilape here.
Up next for the Portland Timbers, pairing perfectly with the Iron Bundle is Abomasnow. Abomasnow is the premier snow setter this generation. That's right, snow. So if you're not familiar with the changes that went over, we switched from hail, which did chip damage every turn similar to sand, and now we have snow, which actually boosts ice-type defensive stat by 1.5, in addition to still having the effects that it originally had for hail on Blizzard and things like that. So now you have one of the best Blizzard users on top of now having access to a Blizzard that can't miss. So this duo is going to go absolutely insane. Abomasnow surprisingly has already seen results in Series 1 pretty well when paired with Titan, and now that we see Iron Bundle here as well, this is just a nice bolster for them to utilize the snow to their best of ability. Plus, it has access to things like Aurora Veil, which can help round out and increase the bulk of a team really nicely. So this thing is surprisingly a kind of slept-on monster in this generation, especially having that weather control. So I'm definitely excited to see this duo together and really excited to see how this team shapes up.
Up next is Bisharp. We were just talking about King Gambit, and we were also just talking about Annihilape. And again, King Gambit, excellent Mon. Bisharp was already excellent, so we were able to put it in the B tier here, and I think this is a great pickup. Again, we're kind of talking about, we're starting to see cores manifest. We see fire types and grass types. We're seeing steel types and fairy types. Speaking of steel and fairy, here's something happening with the New Jersey Jirachis. Bisharp, despite being a middle stage evolution, isn't weak whatsoever, and the fact it has access to Eviolite now makes it almost as bulky as King Gambit. You get access to things like Sucker Punch, strong steel moves, strong fighting moves. Overall, this thing is very powerful, and it has great synergies with Grimmsnarl. And I think the Jirachis are off to a great start in their draft.
Speaking of excellent synergies, the Peachy Pikachu have picked up Volcarona in the A tier. So pairing up with Roaring Moon is really nice for this Pokemon in particular, because not only does it support an offensive move pool, so that way you can use it very flexibly within your draft in the future, it also is an amazing support Pokemon. Having the ability to protect Roaring Moon from those fairy types, if they're going to fire a Moonblast into it, well, they really can't with Volcarona on the board. Just being able to Rage Powder that away, absorb it up, easy peasy. And having access to things like Struggle Bug, Will-O-Wisp, this thing has an incredible support move pool. Even if its defensive stat looks lacking, just having access to Will-O-Wisp will pretty much sure that up, that it actually is a fine defensive stat as well. So this thing is incredibly bulky, very good offensive potential, and overall just an excellent draft when paired, especially with Roaring Moon.
Speaking of excellent drafts, it's Torkoal. The A tier might surprise some people, but not only is Torkoal a pretty good mon in its own right, but with just how Paradox Pokemon are in this format and how enabling it can be, Torkoal had to go to the A tier. Its special attack looks low, but considering it sets its own sun, you have access to Charcoal, and you can even Terrasilize to Terra Fire for even more damage. Torkoal is mean. Torkoal is just straight mean. I would really like to see the other abilities get used in this format, although I'm not requiring that Kira do so at all, but I'd be curious to see White Smoke and Shell Armor be used, because they're not bad. They're just not Drought, right? But maybe there's like a Shell Armor bulky Torkoal that can't be crit. That'd be really, really cool. This is one of the last remaining weather setters at this point, as Pelipper and Abomasnow went, and now here comes Torkoal. Who knows if anyone will be able to pick up Hippowdon or Tyranitar? We'll just have to wait and see. Overall, with Fluttermane, obvious synergy, great pick. Can't wait to see what's next for the Treasure Town Togepi's.
Speaking of, we just talked about a powerful fire type. Here's another one. So new this generation, Skeledirge. So the Snom picked up Skeledirge, knowing that it honestly is really nice to have one of those low-key answers to the Tatsudon that we could eventually see in the future if people aren't too careful with the draft. And honestly, this thing on its own is just an incredible powerhouse. Its new move called Torch Song really allows it to scale really ridiculously, and it's so bulky that it's just so hard to remove from the board. It is a literal ticking time bomb that if people can't deal with it, it is just going to go off and rip through teams on its own. So this thing honestly is just an excellent draft just to really hold an entire team together and really provide a lot of answers to a lot of Pokemon, thanks to the ability to change its typing through Terastallization, its Supreme Bulk, and its access to Unaware. It's just going to be an absolute monster for teams to deal with, and just really, really difficult to take out, especially in a draft format like this. You don't have all the answers to it, and this thing will just sit on the board and eat you up if you're not careful. So great pickup.
So round one was really fun to watch. You get to see individual Pokemon and you can see, yeah, I understand why that was drafted. It's powerful. It makes sense. Now that we're going into later rounds beyond one, we're starting to see where the synergies start to come out. And that's really exciting. As you were saying, we have the Volcarona and the Roaring Moon. We have multiple instances where there's a dragon type joining a steel type, or a steel type joining a fairy type, or etc. Just we're starting to get these cores, and that's really exciting to see. And aesthetically, we're starting to get some vibes as well. When the Portland Timbers picked up Abomasnow and Iron Bundle, I'm wondering just how much more festive can that draft get? What do you think about round two, Garby?
So round two, like you said, you're starting to see those synergies come into place. You're starting to see the options of speed control or the synergies with previous Pokemon. The one, and I said this already, one of the scariest ones was the Windy City Whimsies picking up Masquerada, being that it's a counter to the potential Tatsudon that they could draft later down the line, really limiting the answers for people in the future for that draft pick. And then everything else just really coming together with the duos that they drafted. I loved seeing the Volcarona. I loved seeing the Farigiraf just really trying to bring together and support pieces that could be potentially drafted in the future, as well as the ones they currently have from the powerhouse picks around one. So this is just a really cool draft to see, and I'm excited to see those synergies continue to develop as we go to the draft to really get into the heads of the coaches and their thought process as we move forward.
Yeah, I just want to add one comment about the Meowscarada pick, because it was truly genius, because not only is Meowscarada a great Pokemon, but this is the first example where we can really clearly see in the draft a defensive draft, because if someone else gets Meowscarada, that's a great answer into Dondozo Tatsugiri. It's one of the best, arguably. And the fact that Grace picked it up, and it's not at all a bad mon, you can have it on your team, no question. Any of these teams would have enjoyed a Meowscarada. The fact that Grace picked it up, and it's good for her team, and then it also is going to likely counter what she wants to run later, maybe, who knows. The fact that she picked it up to preventing anyone else from doing so, I think is really important in drafting, and just a really killer move. That being said, let's move on to round three.
So round 3, we're going to start seeing those early C tiers that are actually kind of slept on and really powerful. And one of those C tiers is Orthworm. So the Stallions picked up Orthworm. You look at its base stats, you notice initially it's that monstrous 145 defense that really kind of emphasizes that it's a really bulky defensively Pokemon. But the biggest thing coming out of this thing is the Earth Eater. So having a Steel typing is a really powerful mono type to have, but having immunities to one of your weaknesses and healing off of it creates a very natural ability to create synergy across your team. Paired with the Kilowattrel as well, you're starting to notice that there's a trend here that there could be a potential crazy Earthquake mon in your future. Having that you have 2 immunities on the team, you can easily just start popping Earthquakes left and right. So this thing can sit next to Pokemon and do really well if they're spamming that move out, which is a really powerful thing to have. In addition to that, it also has access to one of the new moves this generation that's incredibly powerful and still really underexplored, the Shed Tail. So Shed Tail giving a substitute and switching out like a U-turn really allows you guys to build a team that can really build up themselves, utilizing a Swords Dance or Dragon Dance or anything like that, and provide that protection for those setup Pokemon to really just go crazy. So I love this pick because it's not telling of what they're going to pick in the future, but it gives them so many options to do it. It's a really smart pick this early in the draft.
Up next is the Treasure Town Togepi's picking up Sableye. What a menace. Every game it's in, Sableye is just a criminal. I think onlookers could look at those stats and notice that they are quite low, below 400 as a total, actually. But Sableye doesn't care about that whatsoever. It is one of the best abusers of Prankster. And I believe it has it has some new tools in this generation, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think it always got Reflect and Light Screen, but I could be wrong. It's actually made an appearance at some regionals, to my knowledge, using Reflect and Light Screen, which is really impressive. Besides that, it gets Prankster Quash, which that alone is ridiculous, but it gets Prankster Will-O-Wisp, it gets Prankster Encore. People have been running Disable on it. The fact that Kira picked this up is just terrifying. It was probably going to go in round 2, 3, or 4, no question, but I think just particularly with the power that is already present on the Togepi's, that's particularly scary. Not to mention, sure, Torkoal's incredibly slow, but if you quash something, Torkoal's going to move first, which is terrifying considering Eruption. So overall, just a really heads-up pick from the Treasure Town Togepi's.
Continuing the trend of me reviewing underrated Pokemon, the Pikachus have drafted Magnezone. So Magnezone, despite its unassuming appearance, is absolutely a monster with this generation. Previous generations, it did have access to things like Hidden Power, but that taken away last gen really did hurt it a little bit. But now with this generation, thanks to Terra typing and Terra Blast, Magnezone can shred off some of its weak in terms of typing because it's so weak to fighting moves and ground moves. That's what kept it kind of held down a little bit. But now with the analytic base 130, damage that this thing can spit out, in addition to that Terra typing, you can go things like Terra Flying or Terra Grass to really kind of shed off those critical weaknesses and then use its immense strengths and that high damage and really surprisingly solid bulk overall for this amazing Steel and Electric type. And if they don't have answers to any sort of Steel typings in that regard, this thing will also pop off. So it's a really nice way to round out some of your team that you have going on here, because you got the Roaring Moon with the Dragon typing, now we got the Steel. So you can anticipate that there's some kind of Fairy Core that's going to be coming up pretty soon. But yeah, Magnezone, just a really solid B tier to pick up, because it's just going to provide that immense damage no matter what.
Up next is the other new Tauros form, Tauros Aqua, picked up by the New Jersey Jirachis. It has the same base stat total line as the Fire type one, and it's just a great mon. Fighting Water, good typing, same abilities, all good abilities. It doesn't get access to Will-O-Wisp like the Fire type one does, but it has access to Wave Crash, which is a powerful new Water type double edge introduced in this generation. Gets Aqua Jet for priority. Just a really strong mon overall. I think it synergizes super well with the first 2 picks that the Jirachis have picked up, and they're going to do great things with it, I'm sure.
All right, next for the Portland Timbers is Ceruledge, a nice Pokemon to really round out this snow core they got going on. Ceruledge comes into the draft as a really bulky option, thanks to its new signature move to come in with this generation with it, the Bitter Blade. So Bitter Blade, slashing them up, healing for half the damage it deals. This means this Pokemon can do some incredible things using things like Bulk Up, and of course having the Terra Grass option is also really nice for it. In addition to that, Flash Fire with Terra typing has proven this generation to be an incredible asset. Utilizing things like Terra Grass and being able to prevent one of the weaknesses of that is just an incredible asset to have. So this thing is going to rip through teams if they're not careful and don't check it. The two Pokemon, both of these two this gen, the Armarouge and the Ceruledge, are just constantly making waves within VGC, and it's going to make waves in this draft just the same.
Up next, Noivern, a very fun dragon type to be picked up by the winning Dragapults. This thing is mostly used for its support capabilities, and its special attack isn't the highest, but it does have access to high base power moves, which helps make up for that, like Draco Meteor and Hurricane. One of the fastest non-prankster boosted Tailwind users in the format, it's going to do really great things with these two ghost types. Speaking of these two ghost types, Noivern is a premier user of the move Boom Burst, and in this generation, you can Terastallize into a normal type and give extra damage to that attack. So these two ghost types, if they don't Terastallize, are not going to take any damage from Boom Burst. So overall, just it seems like a powerful support Pokemon, synergizes well, starting to make a fantasy core with the steel type and a dragon type, but it's really the Boom Burst that scares me the most, and the Dragapults draft so far is looking quite powerful.
As a big fan of Trick Room myself, I love to see this pick at this point in the draft, the Iron Hands. So Iron Hands is easily one of the most powerful Pokemon in this entire generation to come out of Gen 9. With its base 140 attack and its monstrous HP at base 154, this thing is ridiculously strong just out the gate, can go swinging, punching, anything like that, but it also provides a decent support in that it provides Fake Out. So having access to Fake Out on such a slow Pokemon can be really useful, especially for doing things like setting Trick Room. When paired with Farigiraf as well, this thing is really hard to stop. It also low-key has access to things like Swords Dance, meaning that you can take that monstrous base 140 attack and compound it even more, and it makes it really hard to shut down. So this thing can really just be a menace for teams to deal with, and you'd be hard-pressed not to try to have an answer to it coming out of your draft. Otherwise, you might just fall to it on its own. It is absurdly powerful, and you have to respect it throughout this entire draft. It's one of those Pokemon that you just have to fear. It's so good.
Up next is Scizor, a great steel type for the biting Mousehole to pick up. Those stab bullet punches will never get old. They've been around since Gen 4, incredibly good. In Draft League, you can actually build Scizor almost more as a defensive pivot even, because Bug Steel isn't a bad typing whatsoever. Technician is a great ability. Light Metal may strangely get some use. Swarm maybe as well. Either way, this is a really smart pickup by the Milk-Biting Mousehold. No particular cores being formed yet, but just really good mons overall, as cores aren't necessary. They're just general rules to go by. The lowish middling speed is actually really useful in this context, considering that Jugulus and Mousehold are both over 100. And right, you have priority moves, but sometimes you want that slow, bulky U-turn. And in some situations, Scizor can absolutely do that. Overall, really smart pick.
Next is a big fan favorite within not just VGC, but the Pokemon community as a whole, and that's Mimikyu. Mimikyu, since its premier generation, has been incredibly useful and running amok in VGC. With its ability Disguise, it's really hard to take down since you guarantee have to hit it at least twice in order to take it out. Now that's been nerfed from previous generations where it just used to eat the hit for free, but Mimikyu still continues to see wide success and wide play due to its not only its Disguise ability, but its diversity of movesets. While its base stats like its base HP of 55 is pretty low, it has a pretty solid offensive pool. And in addition to that, has a really amazing support pool thanks to not only its typing, but also access to things like Will-O-Wisp and Trick Room. So having a Pokemon that you have to hit twice that can set Trick Room is absolutely a monster that's going to be really difficult for teams to deal with. So not only can it just control Trick Room, it also has access to things like Swords Dance. So now it has an offensive potential threat or a support utility pool, which is so good in these draft leagues for sure. So excellent pickup for this team, and it'll help them round out really nicely going into future picks in the draft.
For the next pick of the Colorado Cramorant, some of you may have been wondering, wow, Richie Bond's really talking a lot about cores. What's the deal with that? I wonder. My secret is that I have no secrets. I drafted a fantasy core right out the gate. Here's Bronzong. I think there's a lot of really good qualities about Bronzong that make it really appealing for what I have so far, but the main thing is that it just offers an immediate, totally different speed tier. Something that can help me in Trick Room or cassette Trick Room for myself later if I end up getting a slower team. With just these three, Trick Room doesn't seem like a great option, but Bronzong does a lot of things other than just be a slow Trick Room setter. It's supportive, it should get access to Wide Guard if I'm not mistaken, just a really tanky, powerful mon. You could even slap on Heavy Metal and Heavy Slam and it does a lot of damage. So I'm really pleased with this pick, and I'm really excited to see what mons I can pick up that work well with Bronzong overall.
A menace of VGC forever. One of my least favorite Pokemon ever created ever, but it is a menace for a reason. Amoonguss, a excellent A tier pick from the Toronto Tinkatons. This thing, I hate it for a particular reason, and that's because Spore, Regenerator, and having a really low speed tier is a menace for somebody who really loves Trick Room. This thing is sussy to the max. I don't like it, but if I don't like it, that means it must be a really, really good Pokemon, and it is. Redirection, Spore, you can't go wrong. It is a excellent, excellent pickup, and you definitely should fear this thing. It can shut down your whole team if you're not careful. So definitely, the coaches better be prepared to deal with this monster.
Up next is Garganacl. I haven't personally watched Cotton play any VGC in Gen 9, but this is such a killer pick for him and the way that he enjoys to play. Garganacl is absurdly bulky, really supportive. Salt Cure is a really silly move to give to a tank. It deals chip damage over time that doesn't expire like Fire Spin, but it does so much more damage to water and steel types. Excuse me. Garganacl, just the quintessential wall, despite being a pure rock typing, which isn't known as a great defensive type. Guess what? You got terrestrialization. You can change your type. Furthermore, talking about Gen 9 mons that get abilities that they have no reason having, Purifying Salt is pretty much good as gold, but it makes you resist ghost types as well. What is going on in this game? Garganacl is incredibly strong and is going to make a really good use of its pairing with Screamtail and King Gambit, and the rest of Cotton's draft, it's going to be scary.
Speaking of scary, and honestly, in my opinion, kind of slept on Pokemon, it is Sandy Shocks. One of the other Paradox Pokemon that found its way into B tier. That just shouldn't mean it should be underestimated. While I think it breaks a little bit of the villain trend of Grace, let me look how silly this guy is. This thing has a monstrous special attack of 121 and a surprisingly excellent offensive typing in the ground electric. It's a big snipe for a lot of people who are probably looking at it being like, this thing snuck into the B tier. I definitely need to pick this up. So maybe that's another villain move from Grace, who knows? But at the same time, just having this nice offensive addition to this already pretty killer and really scary lineup is going to be really scary for a lot of people to deal with. We just saw Garganacl, and this thing is honestly one of the core checks to it because it can hit on to that weaker special defense. Not that Garganacl is a weak special defense, but being able to smack that thing really hard, especially with most of its defensive terror options, is going to be really powerful for Grace in terms of rounding out their offensive core. So I really love to see that, and I hope that we get to see this thing actually get to flex itself in the matches in the future. It's gonna be really cool.
For the last pick of round 3, we have the Glimwood Glimmets picking up Corviknight. What a fantastic mon. Really great steel type, and the flying type helps it a lot. Singles players know too well about Skarmory. Corviknight does wonders in VGC in general. Its bulk is great. There's a lot of really interesting things that it can do in its moveset. It's like particularly in drafts, including screens. It gets Reflect and Light Screen. Pretty crazy. It's a Tailwind setter. You can run Iron Defense Body Press. You can run Bulk Up. Roost is an incredible move for it. It makes pretty decent use of Terra. Really, really great A tier pick from the Glimmets. I don't think there's many steel types left in the A tier at this point, so really, really smart pick from the Glimmets, and they're going to do great with it, I'm sure. So that's round 3. Garby, what are your thoughts?
So round 3, of course, we saw those cores really develop in the A and B tier, but now we're starting to see some of those sneaky C tiers come in. Especially, I'm excited to see things like Earthworm. I really want that thing to make moves because I think it's a very underrated and very slept on Pokemon within the VGC community in general. A lot of people focus on those high tiers a lot of the time, so it's exciting to see such a low-key, powerful Pokemon get picked up, but you're starting to see a lot more supports get rounded out. You have Sableye, you have potentially Mimikyu, you have Amoonguss, you have the Bronzong. So really cool to see these teams really start to take shape and start to add different tools to their roster accordingly, because it's really cool to see like how you can start to see like how the teams are going to start to be crafted now, where before you're like, okay, this has potential, that has potential, but now you're like starting to see the thought process by the coaches, and it's going to be more apparent in round 4 once we start to see everything get rounded out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We're seeing tanks, we're seeing supports. Interestingly, we're seeing a lot more diversity and speed in this round. There's a lot of really slow mons, a couple of really middling mons, and then only like 2 particularly fast mons, being Noivern and Sandy Shocks, which I just think is interesting. People are starting to accomplish different tiers, which I was saying before. I think in a draft situation is a really valuable thing to do. The Earthworm is, I think, our first C tier in the draft, and what a great pick. Just look at his face; he's so happy to be here. I think all the commentary you were making in each individual pick was absolutely correct, and just it's on my mind right now, and we'll get there in a minute. But that Kilowattrel, Orthworm, there's got to be an Earthquake. It's going to show up eventually, I'm sure of it. But really happy with round 3, and I'm really excited to see the more C tiers and the more niche picks that come out of round 4. And that being said, let's do it. Glimwood Glimmets come back and pick up Glimora, the evolution of their mascot, and a really, really interesting mon that honestly I don't think has been sorted out in Gen 9 VGC yet. It has so many really unique tools, really interesting typing. It's kind of like Nihilego, but it's just so weird and interesting and cool. And what does this thing do? It's making entry hazards viable in VGC. It's really, really strange, and it has so much potential. So when I'm going to be watching Lady Dunmore's games, I'm going to be really looking at these Glimora sets, because I just don't know what to expect. It's so interesting and cool, and it's going to be promising for the rest of the draft, I believe.
One of the surprising Pokemon for me this gen is the Gen 9 Pikachu in Palmont. So Palmont is a fighting electric type with some pretty okay stats. It's kind of squishy, has some decent offenses, and its base stat total is pretty okay. But the biggest selling point for me for this Pokemon in particular is Revival Blessing. So we already saw, again, the Tatsudon coming into play, and over the course of Series 1, we started to see people using Palmont more and more, because Revival Blessing in and of itself is a core reason to pick up a Pokemon. You literally get to revive one of your teammates. So being able to have not just 4 Pokemon come into play, but 4.5 Pokemon, especially if you pick something that's super bulky, is going to be an incredibly powerful asset and something to be feared, again, from all of these different coaches that have to go against this team. In addition to that, Palmont also sports Fake Out, Close Combat, and a new move that is unique to it in Double Shock. So having the 120 base power electric move off of that speed tier is really, really good. And not only that, it gets to also Loki shred its electric typing without the use of Terra, which is also a really cool, unique attribute. So if it has to somehow live a, like, Earth, any sort of ground hit, it's going to do that really, really well. So this thing kind of just sporting a really amazing support and offensive move pool, despite the fact that it is lumped into its own typing. And that Revival Blessing is just going to be an absolute monster to deal with, and I don't envy the people that have to play against it.
Up next, we got Vaporeon in the C tier from Cotton. Another just incredibly bulky pick. You look at these first 4 picks, I think they all have HP stats over 100. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that is just so silly. Its ability Water Absorb is really useful, especially with that Garganacl. You can have a switch for water type moves, which is just fantastic. Hydration may get some use, maybe against the Nidocanes who picked up Pelipper, but overall, really cool mon. It does hurt losing Scald. That's particularly why it's in the C tier, not the B tier, is that it doesn't really have a great spammable water type move, but as a bulky water, there are few that are truly better than Vaporeon, and I like that it's joined its Sylveon brethren here with the Sydney Sylveons.
Speaking of big base HP pools, we have one of the biggest, Satitan. Satitan is an absolute monstrosity when it comes to its HP. Even with those pretty mediocre defenses, Satitan has proven itself in the snow especially to be an absolute bulky tyrant. If you equip this thing with an Assault Vest and put it in the snow somehow, it is crazy how bulky this thing gets. In addition to that, it also has access to things like Belly Drum, so even though it cuts its HP pool down, it's still going to be bigger than most, even because it's so massive. Cutting it in half still makes it higher than most in the draft. So having that plus the Ice Shard is already just a default strategy you can go to, and it actually has just a pretty decent ice pool. Being an ice type as well, we get to finally highlight that since you're an ice type, you can actually change out of the weak defensive option of ice and get access to things like either, say, for example, a Terra Ground, or you can always shift to something like Terra Water in order to break out of that poor defensive option in ice and still retain that amazing stab option in the offensive category. So this thing, kind of incredible, and I think going to be a really slept on pick. I really love this pick, especially because I think it's also one of Jugs' favorite Pokemon this generation. So it's really cool that not only does it have this like crazy potential, it's also just one of the drafters' favorite Pokemon. So it's really cool to see. I'm excited how they see it.
Speaking of drafters' favorite Pokemon being a good reason to pick it up in a draft, I'm a big fan of Braviary. This, I think, was one of the highest value C tiers because not only does it get you a Tailwind mode, but it's also just a pretty powerful Pokemon. I have 2 Pokemon here that are powerful physical attackers, albeit that Dragapult could have Clear Body and isn't worried about Intimidate. but having a Defiant option is just something that I really incredibly value. It's very powerful, and I think it makes really good use of Terrestrialization. You can boost its normal type moves to do crazy damage, you can boost its Brave Birds to go insane, or you can actually finally get Stab on that unique close combat move that it gets that it shares with Staraptor, and not many other flying types like Braviary. So I'm really happy to get this, one of my favorite mons from Gen 5, great abilities, and I think it's going to do a lot of good work for me in this draft.
Now, looking at this next Pokemon, its base stat total for Palafin is enough of a reason for Sherwood Berry Bandits to scoop this up. So, the base 160 attack is monstrous, almost akin to when people thought about how powerful Dracovish was in the last gen. This is pretty much Gen 9's Dracovish. It just swings really hard, has pretty impressive bulk for what it is. He's just so silly. The only drawback is that you have to start in your 0 form for Palafin, which has significantly weaker base stats. Naturally, we didn't want to clutter the slide with that base stat, but just knowing that all you have to do is switch out to qualify to become from 0 to hero means that this thing can be an absolute menace within the VGC space. All you gotta do is open with it, switch it out, and then knowing later this guy's gonna come back in, just start swinging like crazy. It also has access to an incredible move pool in terms of its water moves. It has access to Wave Crash, the basically Flare Blitz for water types. It has access to Jet Punch, a upgraded Aqua Jet just for this Pokemon basically, and of course Flip Turn. So if you want to do some chip damage on the way out in order to get your transformation, you could certainly do so and get in and out just fine. Having access to Terra Water as well makes this thing an absolute menace for any teams to deal with, so they have to have a plan going in for how they're going to deal with Palafin going into the future. So if you're not sporting those crazy bulky water types, then you better fear your life for this, because you might lose the game just to a series of Jet Punches. And I really love this Pokemon in particular on this team, because it already starts rounding out that elemental core. So you see you got the water type, you got the Arcanine for the fire, adding a nice defensive switch in for this Palafin in general, and of course you have the Brute Bonnet. So that's like a really good set of Pokemon in order to give the Palafin a lot of options to switch. So I really love this.
Up next, it's Doxbun for the Milk Biting Mousehold. This is a really interesting fairy type. It's just fascinating to get a fire type immunity, which is a type that fairy types you normally struggle with, not because they're weak to it, but just because they can't usually hit it too hard, and then get a defense boost on top of that, and of course they had to give it Body Press. This is a really interesting Pokemon, and again, a new Paldea Pokemon that is definitely underexplored. There's no Pokemon on the team right now that have access to something like Lava Plume, but that might be something in its future, or even in draft, you can probably get away with just like a single target flamethrower to the side if you really need it. Two really good abilities. We were just talking about the fire immunity that comes from Well-Baked Body, but Aroma Veil actually has huge implications in the draft format. In regular VGC, you probably wouldn't see Aroma Veil too much on this Pokemon, but if Milk Biting Mousehold have a particular strategy that gets stopped by Taunt or something, Aroma Veil is a really awesome tool to have, and since we're lacking like Aromatisse in this generation, I think Doxbun is super interesting and cool and bulky, and it's always just good to have a fairy type on your team. Talking about cores, Fantasy Core kind of starting to show up. While Jugulus isn't a dragon type anymore, we have a Steel, we have a Fairy, so very interesting. Really, really smart pickup from the Milk Biting Mousehold. Speaking of
Gen 9 new Pokemon that are really interesting and honestly really underexplored, we have Toedscool. So Toedscool this generation looks on paper to be amazing. It has access to Spore, it has access to Rage Powder, heck, it even has access to Trick Room, meaning that even over Amoonguss, it has a unique niche, and that can also be a really high utility mon having the Trick Room setter. The only true downside to this Pokemon, and you can look at it as a downside, is the Mercurial Might. So if you don't know, its ability means that anytime you use a status move, you will go last within your particular speed tier. For speed tiers in Pokemon, if you're using a neutral move, for example, it's going to just be base 0, and Toedscool will always go last within that speed tier. So because of that, it means that you're going to often get slow spores and go behind other Pokemon, so there's a chance that this thing can go down, especially with its typing of ground and grass. However, sometimes that can actually be a benefit. So Spore, for example, going through with Mercurial Might going last, that means you do automatically get a free turn of sleep, which can be to the user's benefit. It also means that you're pretty much guaranteed to know when this thing's going to go off within the speed tiers. It has a base 100 speed, so it is really fast, but in Trick Room, it does mean you always go last within any particular speed tier, so it's incredibly consistent. And also, because of that ability, in addition to it going down in speed, it does also allow it to go through abilities. So if anyone drafts Golden Go, And that thing is going to be able to be put to sleep despite the fact that it has the ability not to. Same with, for example, we did see earlier in the draft the Garganackle. This thing can also put it to sleep with Spore. So it's a kind of really slept on, really powerful Pokemon that I wish got more exploration. And I'm glad to see it in a draft because now we get to explore it. So this thing is going to be really powerful. I'm really happy to see this going forward.
Up next, it's Gardevoir. One of the strongest fairy types available in the format, and with a huge amount of utility, the Wind and Dragapult's picked up this really, really smart B tier. Interesting to note that there are 2 telepathy mons on this team. It may be Cosmos is going for a specific strategy, but we'll have to wait and see and find out. Synchronize, pretty useful in draft. Trace is incredibly useful. There's a lot of archetypes that you might end up facing, like perhaps Swift Swim with Rain, and if you get a lucky Trace, now Gardevoir has Swift Swim, which is pretty great. Again, it's really powerful. It's got a good speed tier. It's reasonably bulky, and I'm really pleased that the Wind and Dragapults have picked it up, and I think it synergizes particularly well with the rest of the team. Talking about cores, we got our Fantasy Core. Let's go, baby.
Let's go, Fantasy Core. And looking at the Portland Timbers have picked up Pincursion, a C-tier Pokemon that is mostly known for its ability Electric Surge. Now, Electric Surge will be able to set electric terrain, which means it does really synergize very well with the Iron Bundle. The Iron Bundle sporting Quirk Drive means that it does get a boost automatically without the need for booster energy. So being able to utilize that electric terrain is often what Pincursion is used for, but don't get it twisted. This thing can actually do a surprising amount of damage thanks to its electric terrain and having an electric stab move option. So having access to Zippy Zap in particular, I think it was Zippy Zap, wasn't it?
A Zing Zap? I think Zippy Zap is what Eevee got.
It's Zig Zap. That's what it is. Oh, like, yeah, Zippy Zap's a Pikachu thing. That's what it was. But yeah, having access to a pretty strong stab move in the Zig Zap and having Electric Surge, this thing can actually be a menace. If you slap a Choice Band on there, it'll just start punching stuff. So we can't sleep on it. Even with its low speed and low base HP, it can still do a lot for a team outside of just having Electric Surge. But the Electric Surge is definitely the big reason to pick it up, and I'm glad to see that they did to get that synergy.
The New Jersey Jirachis sniping another mascot. It's Sylveon. 2 of the very best fairy types available in this generation are now on the New Jersey Jirachis. We've seen Sylveon do really well in VGC in general, as well as just on the ladder, on the regular Battle Stadium ladder, and it's a really solid mon. Normally you're going to see Pixelate Hyper Voice. That's kind of what Sylveon does. A lot of people run it with Throat Spray. It's just super solid, but I think it gets access to all of those silly support moves that the EV lines generally have access to, and I bet you Hey Boy Blue is going to pilot it in a really cute and interesting way in at least one game. So I'm really looking forward to that. And the New Jersey Jirachis draft is just looking really, really fun at the moment.
Speaking of other powerful fairy types, the Peachy Pikachu have picked up Florges. So Florges, normally in the old generations, wasn't it was pretty unassuming in previous generations. It has a ridiculously high base special defense and a pretty solid special attack in general, as well as just an overall solid bulk package. However, it never really saw much because there wasn't really anything else to do with it. It just had pretty solid base stat line and some cool stuff to go with it. But now this generation, with the ability for Pokemon to Terra and shift their typings around, Terra Grass in particular has been really popular, and having access to something like Flower Veil is really good for a lot of teams, especially ones that really want to go into that grass type. Stuff like Volcarona and Magnezone both love to shift into Terra Grass to protect themselves. So having access to Flower Veil, which of course makes grass types not have their status ever lowered or have any status conditions and protects it from them, is going to be some really powerful asset for them. We've also seen some people utilize stuff like Mirror Herb and Skill Swap in order to do things like check Dondozo. So this thing actually has a plethora of different movesets that it can move to, despite the fact that it hasn't seen much play in the past. So having the ability to shift these different potential grass types and support them in this crazy way with this Pokemon is going to be really cool to see, and I'm excited to see these synergies really pop off.
Up next with the Treasure Town Togepis, they pick up Toxtricity. Unique typing, cool mon, some interesting abilities, and just really fascinating. It lost its Gigantamax form from Gen 8, but that's fine. We're here with Terrestrialization, and Toxtricity makes great use of Terrestrialization. It's most commonly known for its Terra Normal Boom Burst, one of the strongest Boom Bursts possible. I think it is the strongest Boom Burst, thanks to Punk Rock. Plus is a cool ability. I'm not sure if we're going to see it get any use. Technician, I think, activates on like 2 moves that Toxtricity has. So when you see this thing, it's going to be a rock star. It's going to be throwing sound moves at you, and it's pretty strong. Something to note about Toxtricity too is that at least the amped form, and by the way, the Togepi's do get both forms of this mon since there's no significant changes between them. The amped form does get shift gear, which is kind of cute and interesting. And considering that the attack stat is like not terrible, I want to see physical Toxtricity in this format, and hopefully Kira gets to do that for us.
Next, a big fan favorite of the CGC, thanks to Jack himself, of course, piloting this thing at Liverpool. Unfortunately, it's not on Jack's team this time, but the Snom have picked up an excellent Pokemon in Espathra. So Espathra, having access to Speed Boost in particular, makes this thing an absolute menace. Speed Boost is pretty much like non-existent this generation on a lot of Pokemon, so Pokemon having access to it, it needs to grab attention. In addition to that, it does have its own signature move in the Lumina Crash. Lumina Crash, of course, being just like acid spray on crack, really just hitting Pokemon really hard and dropping their special defense really allows Pokemon like, for example, the Skeledirge to really just come in swinging and really do a lot of damage as a follow-up attack to this thing. So it's going to be a monster that will rip through teams if teams aren't careful. So they have to really pay attention to this moving forward. And especially because there's also options like things like Opportunist, which I would love to see pop off in certain particular matchups, especially if they see a Pokemon that might be one to set up. Opportunist just stealing those setup stats essentially and copying them over to themselves is going to be really, really cool. So I'm really excited to see what potential sets that Keenan comes up with, because it's going to just be really cool to see this Pokemon in action, of course.
My first thought for round 4 is that the fairies are basically gone. We had fairies go in round 1, we had fairies go in round 2, I think we had fairies in round 3, and with Darkspun, Sylveon, Florges, and Gardevoir, I'm sorry guys, there's really no fairies left. So this will be interesting to see. I mean, fairies aren't essential by any means, but they are really useful to have. It's one of the best types in the game. Beyond that, just some really good special attackers seems to be really interesting, and man, that Palafin it's so scary. What do you think, Garby?
Putting out all that stuff, like the fairies going away, really powerful. Palafin, really big draft this round. Even just the Toxtricity, I think, is going to be a really scary offensive Pokemon for people to deal with, especially paired with that Sableye in their team, is going to be a really big threat to deal with. But I really want to emphasize for the viewers here, Pawmont is a really, really scary slept-on Pokemon, and Revival Blessing is going to really go off in this entire draft. So, and like, again, I keep highlighting, I got to keep pushing this storyline. I got to push the agenda that Grache's just an absolute villain this draft, that we're just going to see more villainy and more deviousness coming out of it. And I just want to make sure the coaches are paying attention. It's really scary.
We're framing it. We're calling it villainy, but just like, I think just from a conventional level, Grace's draft is the most intelligent. I'm a big fan of a lot of drafts here, but the way that Grace is making her picks is worthy of us making a little footnote at the end of each round, because it's so smart and so good and so terrifying. So just kudos to Grace for being an excellent drafter, and we'll see if it pays off in the battles. I'm sure it will. That being said,
so well put together. Yeah.
That being said, it is in fact round 5.
So in round 5, starting off again with the Snob, we have Gogoat. So Gogoat, kind of a really underrepresented Pokemon, but it has a really solid baseline. We're starting to get into those C tiers where they're starting to scoop up some Pokemon that are kind of like low-key big value. And having a nice grass type to round out some of these Pokemon that they're working with is just really good. So having a base 123 HP with base 100 attack is going to be able to do a lot of work. It also has access to things like Leech Seed, and in addition to that, also has access to things like Horn Leech, so you can expect this thing to start trying to wall people. It has a very solid bulk line, especially because of that HP. So this thing, especially when paired with Terra, Leech Seed hasn't really seen too much play because of the shift to Terra Grass, but in a draft type of format like this, where it's a very limited operating pool and you don't have access to everything, this thing can definitely see some really good play and some really high value. So I'm definitely excited to see it, especially in the C tier. It's one of the stronger ones that we'll get to see. So it's really cool that we're going to see this early in the draft. It's a very smart pick.
Moving on, we got Indeedee Male. For those wondering, Indeedee Male is in fact one tier below his sister, and this is just a really good mon. Sure, it doesn't have access to follow me like the female version does, but it's more offensive, it's faster, it's got great stats, it's just good. Also more notably, it's a Trick Room user. Now, Indeedee Female was elected to not be using Trick Room in this draft league, so Indeedee Male has that specific niche going for it. And I'm really excited to see what it does. It lost Expanding Force, but Hyper Voice, Psychic, support moves, it's cool. It's a great pick. And that normal typing actually really helps it into opposing Ghost matchups, which actually has a particular synergy with Flutter Mane for two reasons. One, for what I just mentioned, that normal types are immune to Ghosts, so there's that switch. But two, Flutter Mane hates priority moves, and Indeedee with Psychic Surge is going to be able to just ease that issue completely. Really smart pick. Kira continuing with the smart picks, and I can't wait to see the other half of her draft at this point.
Next pick, can we get a fantasy core in the chat, guys? Because we have another one. So the Florgus, we have the Klefki, and of course we have the Roaring Moon. Rounding out this excellent fantasy core is the support pick in that Klefki. So having the Prankster access and having access to screens, having access to Trick Room this generation in particular, the Klefki is really, really solid pickup. It's just a great support Pokemon. There's not really much else to say about it. It's got excellent typing, it's got Prankster, it's got support moves, and you really can't ask for anything better than that.
Armarouge, it's time. We knew this thing would get picked up eventually, as we were talking about with Ceruledge. These brothers of sorts are just really, really strong new fire types. Flash Fire with Terrestrialization is such a good mechanic. It works really, really well. That being said, Weak Armor, also really popular with this mon. You can hit it, proc its weakness policy with a specific move. You might have to Terra to make that happen, but hey, it works. So I'm looking at you, Sylveon, with your Fairy type quick attacks. You can go Terra Dark or Terra Fighting or whatever works for that draft situation, and boom, you got increased speed, you got your weakness policy procs, and it's going to be really hard to stop. Now, if they want Psychic Terrain, they're going to have to pick up Indeedee, which at this point they cannot, because they have Grimmsnarl and Sylveon and Armarouge. That's all the A tiers that they can get. Notably also, this Pokemon is like pretty bulky, and its speed, while middling, isn't terrible, and it can be used in a variety of situations. Really, really cool fire type. The Jirachis are absolutely killing it with their draft.
Up next, I got the pleasure of showing one of my favorite Pokemon in Hawlucha. Hawlucha, while its stats look pretty unassuming, it does have a blistering high 118 speed and a really respectable 92 attack, which gets even crazier when paired up with Unburdened. So as soon as Hawlucha actually consumes whatever held item it has, its speed gets ridiculous. And that leads to some really, really cool and really funny strategies in that you can do things like, for example, absorb an electric seed with Pincursion. Or even still, you can add in different things like, for example, with Mirror Herb. So if you have any Pokemon in the future that you can just swagger off into your opponent, you can hit them with Swagger, get the Mirror Herb copy, and then proc that Unburden and go crazy. So some cool cheese surprise strats coming out for that I might have just spoiled for some of those strategies. But these are all things that were always tinkering in my head to try, and I'm really excited to see if any of those come forward for the Portland Timbers in particular, because I love this thing. It has a niche, but when it occupies that niche, it can go really crazy, and I'm so happy to see it.
Up next is Jolteon, one of the fastest Pokemon in the format with a blistering 130 speed and pretty decent damage. Now, Jolteon isn't necessarily known for its great offensive move pool, but ding ding ding, new move, Terra Blast. Although it might seem kind of silly, I've seen people run this with Terra Ice. Now, Jolteon isn't really bulky, so it doesn't really care that it's weak to things, and then you can run one of the strongest combos in the game, Bolt Beam, naturally on Jolteon, who has no business learning an ice move. Another tech that I have to point out that Jack might hate me for, but I'm going to say it and people know about it, is the fact that Jolteon gets Pin Missile, and it can proc on Annihilate and boost that Rage Fist up to maximum power if you are doing that strategy particularly. I'm sure that was a consideration. It's been used in VGC. We've all seen it. It's scary. It's really, really difficult to deal with. Annihilate, just so devastating. And just Volt Absorb is a really interesting tool to have on your team. You never know when you might need an electric immunity, especially if Cosmos picks up some water types or something in the future. Quick Feet would be really interesting to see get used, because there's a world where something this fast can outspeed everything on the opposing team side under Tailwind if they proc their Quick Feet, which is just kind of cool and interesting. Great Eevee evolution. I wonder how many more we'll be seeing in this draft. Really smart pick from the Dragapults.
Sure, we're going to see plenty of evolutions, but right now we're not talking about one of those. Right now we're going to talk about Magneton. So in the C tier, you are looking for some crazy value picks, and Magneton is definitely one of those. So we saw Magnezone earlier get picked up, and Magneton, even though it is the pre-evolution to it, that does open up some doors for it in that you can slap an Eviolite on this thing, and seeing its 95 defense and 70 base special defense, that Eviolite will do wonders for it. So we still have access to that same strong move pool, and honestly, very close to the same amount of special attack that is in the Magnezone, except we get it on a smaller, cheaper, more budgety package for draft. So you're starting to see this ability for things that are normally pretty weak, actually providing nice value because it stacks up in the budget a lot better for a lot of teams. So this is a really excellent budget pick in the C tier, and I'm excited to see just the Magnezone at home actually do work.
Up next, it's Calyrex, the very first D tier of the draft. Very exciting. Has pretty promising offenses on both sides as a D tier, which is kind of nice. Its speed is it's pretty low. Its defenses and HP are not particularly good, but Fire Ground is a really good offensive combination, and Solid Rock will hopefully help it live a little bit longer. Maybe not against water type attacks, but once again, another great candidate for terrestrialization. Even if you move into one of its already stab types, being either fire or ground, Calyrex loves that because it just has that crippling double weakness to water. If it's just a single weakness and it has Solid Rock, Calyrex can tank at least a hit. Furthermore, this is a fire type. We see a Doxbun that can maybe proc its well-baked body. Also, another pivot for Scizor. Just a really cool mon, and it has a lot of potential, and I'm excited to see how the mouse will decide to use it.
Sherwood Berry Bandits have picked up Colossal, arguably the strongest, if not one of the strongest Pokemon from last generation. Colossal has seen better days in this generation. The loss of Dynamax in particular definitely hampered its ability to do the crazy work that it did from last gen. But in particular on this team, this can be really scary. Having access to Terra means you can shed half of that weakness to your water moves, but still proc Steam Engine and go ballistic. So seeing the Palafin on this team, that means that these two together are going to be an amazing dynamic duo that are going to go insane into a lot of drafts when people aren't careful. So this thing is still a menace and honestly very slept on. Even if it's not as strong as it was in the previous generation, it's nothing to scoff at during this gen. It's going to go insane if people let it happen. So definitely be careful to my fellow coaches over here.
Up next is my D tier pick that I rushed. This is Pachirisu. I saw the picks that were going. I saw that Indeedee Female and Pachirisu were the only Follow Me users left, and I wanted Follow Me. I could have opted for Rage Powder, but I decided no, it's time for the Sagen Park special. The Volt Absorb Follow Me combo is only really particularly helping Braviary at this point, but I still think it's a great tool to have. This thing has Nuzzle. I'm a big fan of Nuzzle in general. I think just 100% accurate Thunder Wave that can't be taunted and deals a little bit of damage. What's not to love? This Pokemon is really cool, it's really cute, it's a world champion, and I had to get it.
Speaking of the Follow Me users that Rich just highlighted, right afterwards came Indeedee Female, so now all the Follow Me users are gone out of the draft. Indeedee is easily one of the strongest Pokemon within the previous generation, and now this one, just because of its access to Psychic Terrain plus Follow Me to add this incredible support option to it. In addition to, even though it's not in this draft, Indeedee did get Trick Room this gen through a weird set of circumstances with the game. We are not using Trick Room in this draft just because of the ability to get one can be a little difficult for our drafters, and ultimately it was decided that it wouldn't be in our best interest to do so. But nonetheless, Indeedee goes insane, especially when paired up with Pokemon that really love to have this redirection option. So Titan in particular is something I have an eye on this team because having access to Belly Drum plus Follow Me can be a devastating combination that just goes insane against opponents. So really, really cool to see and a really excellent pickup.
Up next, another excellent support Pokemon. It's Grafaiai coming out of the B tier. This is the first Pokemon on Cotton's team that is squishy, but that's fine because you're going to give it a Focus Sash. This has a really interesting move pool along with its signature move Doodle that replaces yours and your ally's ability with whatever you target, which is pretty interesting. I feel like there's some cool things you can do with that. That being said, most of the Pokemon on this team so far like having their abilities, so I'm curious if there's going to be Pokemon down the line that take better use of Doodle. But besides Doodle, it gets Acid Spray, it gets Fake Out, it's a Prankstermon. You could also do Unburden if you want to go really fast. This is really interesting, and it's cool to get this type of supportive diversity finally hitting the overall super bulky Sylveon's draft so far.
Which continues to segue me so well, because next we have another unburdened support Pokemon in the Drifbloom. So Drifbloom is kind of an unassuming Pokemon. It has really, really high base HP, but with really low defenses. It has pretty decent attacking stats, but also like a pretty mediocre speed tier until we factor in that Unburden. Oftentimes you will see a Drifbloom go insane with support moves, often paired up with different Pokemon that allow it to consume an item, use Unburden, and go crazy. It does have access to Flare Boost though as well, so when this thing is burned, it actually gets increased special attack. So it has some pretty interesting, diverse applications, and in my opinion, it is a really, really high value C tier. Having access to support moves like Strength Sap and Tailwind, in addition to having just a pretty decent offensive move pool for what it is, this thing kind of goes crazy. So I would be careful when seeing this thing, because you don't really know what kind of options that they're going to pick up, and either one of them is pretty scary.
The last pick of round 5, the Glimmets pick up Umbreon. Just an incredible tanky Pokemon. Mono Dark on a stat pool like this turns out to be super useful. Not to mention that as a pivot for certain Pokemon that are around here, it works super well. Tauros and Glimmora don't want to take Psychic type attacks. Umbreon eats those up. Furthermore, it's just really useful. Synchronize could get some play, but Inner Focus being immune to Intimidates for perhaps payback or something, but really the fake out immunity is what you're playing for. It gets all the crazy support moves that the EV evolutions tend to get, including Yawn. It's just a really fantastic bulky Pokemon, and it's a design that we all love, and it's another EV evolution being drafted. What do you think about round 5?
Now, even though there was a fair mix of Pokemon, I think round 5 in particular was a big emphasis on support. So you have things like the Klefki, Indeedee, Pachirisu, Grafaiai, Drifbloom, Umbreon, a lot of very either tanky or very supporty Pokemon to help round out teams, and it's starting to see where the drafts are going and really coming together as a whole. There were some offensive picks. There was the Hawlucha, which I love. There was the Cole, which I also love. So there were some great choices there, but I think in terms of what truly won in terms of roles in this round, it was definitely support.
Absolutely, yeah. This was round 5 was the support round, and I mean we got 2 follow me users, which is just kind of silly because there's only so many of those. But I do want to make a special note that Drifbloom was a repeat draft for the Windy City Whimsies. They did run it in Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl, and I just love that. I think it's so cute. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I had full intention of picking up Magnezone before the Peachy Pikachu picked it up because it was a mon that I used in BDSP that did a ton of work for me. So as we see those picks, I just want to point them out, because they're pretty great. They're pretty good. Speaking of repeat picks, the Wind and Dragapults were notorious for their Raikou in BDSP, and like Jolteon's probably the closest thing in Paldea to Raikou, so I just think that's kind of cute. I also love seeing Pokemon that are poised to do really well in draft that just wouldn't be used otherwise, specifically Magneton. Magneton is not a bad mon whatsoever. There's quite a few middle stage mons, including stuff like Haunter, that are just perfectly legitimate in Draft League, and people overlook them because they have evolved forms that are different. So really happy with this. My last note is that Go-Goat as a C tier, there's not a lot of bulky grass types in this generation, and I think that for a lot of teams that's something that's really valuable. You have like a Moongus, Brute Bonnet, Go-Goat, and like a couple others, and that's it. And Go-Goat was one of the best budget ones, so we'll see what other grass types get picked up further on in the draft. We're on to round 6. We're halfway through. Up next is Morgrem. As a D tier, this thing's pretty fun. It's pretty great. I'm not going to say it's necessarily good, although it has a lot of good things going for it. It has a good typing. It still gets the same great abilities that Grimmsnarl gets, and it gets most of the same moves, and it's just a little gremlin. What's not to love? It's just funny. It's really nice. Again, the speed doesn't really matter because you can go for screens, and it's just really fun to begin seeing these picks that are really exclusive to draft formats that are going to do really well in the league. It's really exciting for me personally to get these underused Pokemon some representation.
Here we go, another evolution getting drafted. This time we have Espeon for the Windy City Whimsies. So Espeon in particular, while I think kind of unsung in comparison to some of the other picks that we've seen the Jolteon, we've seen Umbreon in particular is pretty well known in VGC to be a pretty big monster. Having access to a very strong special attack of 130 and a very, very good speed of 110, this thing is an offensive powerhouse. In addition to that, it has access to Magic Bounce, which in my opinion is one of the funnest abilities that I've ever seen in Pokemon in general, and it's been around a long time. Just being able to shrug off status conditions in addition to shrug off just pretty much any sort of status getting thrown at it and bouncing it back at the opponent, it can be really, really funny to actually utilize this Pokemon in particular times. I love the interaction between Magic Bounce and Parting Shot in particular. Just switching out your own Pokemon is just really funny to me. It just has such funny interactions. But this thing's offensive pool is just really solid. You can get away with like a nice Calm Mind Sword Power set and go crazy if people aren't prepared for it. Or you can just slap some Choice Specs on it and just have it pelt people with all kinds of crazy strong moves. So this is just a nice, surprisingly strong budget pickup. And there's a big power creep this generation, but it allows Pokemon like Espeon that are really strong to creep their way into drafts because it's rated all the way down the C tier in comparison to them, and it's still a very powerful Pokemon in its own right.
I was just asking, what are they going to do with Grafaiai here? I wonder if the Sydney Sylveons have a plan. It's slacking. Slacking on its own right would basically never be used, but we've all seen it on the Showdown ladder. It's Grafaiai doodling an ability onto slacking that is not Truant, and that's all it needs. If you ignore Truant, making it so weak in general, if you get rid of that, replace it with almost literally anything, it's a legendary. It has 670 base stats, mostly in bulk, and the special defense isn't super high, but it's bulky enough in its HP stat where that totally doesn't matter. You can also run moves like Bulk Up and make it even more powerful. It has an insane amount of coverage. It's on par with Snorlax as far as being a bulky normal type that learns basically every move you could ever want. If you are a coach and you don't have a plan to stop Doodle from happening, you are in for a tough time.
One of the funniest Pokemon this generation to me is this funny little guy, Flamigo. He's a flamingo. He's your friend, Flamigo. Great guy. But in addition to that, even though it looks like that this is just kind of a meme Pokemon that you pick up really early on in your playthrough, this thing actually has some really interesting movesets. And in addition to that, has some really interesting support move pool and abilities. We got to talk about Co-Star for sure. Its unique ability here, when this Pokemon enters the battle, it copies an ally's stats change. So anything that goes on here that has some crazy stats changes will absolutely go insane with Flamigo. In particular, I'm kind of looking at Titan again as the core of this entire team. And knowing that Flamigo can come in after a belly drum, it just makes me shudder. That can be an absolute menace to do. In addition to that, another thing that's kind of slept on with Flamigo is its access to Wide Guard. So if people forget about that, and hopefully maybe they'll reflect on this, maybe they'll rewatch it, they'll remember, but do your research and realize that this thing actually has a really good move pool and is kind of slept on, despite the fact that, again, it looks like an early game playthrough menace. It's a really good Pokemon and should be respected.
Up next for the Colorado Cramorant is Crocodile. I felt like I was getting into a position where I wanted a strong ground type. It just seemed about right, and the dark type does a lot of work for me as well. Considering I have 2 ghost weaknesses already, I wanted something that could pivot. I wanted Intimidate. Moxie is a great ability. Anger Point is cute. There's something that you can do there for sure. But Crocodile is just great. It's another Mon from Unova along with Braviary that I like a lot, and it's actually a really good partner with Braviary. You can click Tailwind, you can click Earthquake at the same time, you can get Intimidate going, or you can get Moxie going. I think what's great about Crocodile is that even on weeks that I don't bring it, it has to be respected. You have to have a plan for it, or else you might just get swept by Moxie Earthquake. So I'm really happy to pick this up, and I think it's a great design, great Pokemon, happy with it, love my draft.
Here were Berry Bandits picking up Sneasel, a C tier Pokemon this round, and really doing their best to try to look like a really good Gen 8 team. But jokes aside, this thing is has really good synergy with Cole, and has access to something that's unique to it in comparison to, say, Weavile, is the Inner Focus. Having access to Inner Focus means that this thing not only provides Fake Out support, but is immune to Fake Out. So now you can just Fake Out whatever you want, and no one can really stop you. It also has a respectable attack of 95 and a base speed of 115. This thing actually is kind of a slept-on menace despite the fact how squishy it is. You could fix squishiness with a Focus Sash, no big deal, and still provide that support. Also, the reason why it gets paired up really well with Cole and did in Gen 8 is because it has access to a very weak Surf. And a very weak Surf is a perfect thing to pair up with a Weakness Policy Steam Engine Colossal. So this thing is an excellent pairing with the Cole from last time, and those two together create a very surprisingly very powerful budget duo that is very impressive for a draft pick in particular. So I'm really excited to see this duo come out.
It's Jumpluff for the Milk Biting Mousehold. This Pokemon was also really particularly good in BDSP, and it's funny that like the only 2 leagues we've done in the CGC so far, Jumpluff's been pretty solid. It's been great because you don't get to see Jumpluff a whole lot. It's an incredibly fast chlorophyll user. There's no Sunny Day on this team at the moment, at least not automatic Sunny Day, but there's still manual Sunny Day, and it's so freaking fast. And it gets access to Sleep Powder. This thing is really, really cool. I believe it still gets Strength Sap and Leech Seed. It's a pretty good grass type that has really excellent support utility, and I'm sure the Mouseholds are going to use it supremely well. It also gets Tailwind, and Infiltrator might have a niche. There might be a situation where Infiltrator comes up. So overall, Cleffa's draft is doing incredibly well. Can't wait to see the rest of the picks.
Now, if we want to talk about Gen 9 causing some Pokemon to have glow-ups, I honestly think Flareon is a good candidate to throw in there as one of the biggest glow-ups. Now, originally, this thing was an obvious Guts user. You would have to put Toxic Orb on it because it can't be burned. It's a fire type. But now in this gen, you have access to Terra, so you can shift your typing to say, oh, normal, and maybe click Facade on Guts. That is a lot of damage. Just an absurd amount of damage. So despite the fact that it does have a pretty weak speed tier overall, just having access to Guts and having access to Facade and even have access to Quick Attack in particular, meaning that you have a priority move on an already Guts Terra normal Flareon, that's just a really scary thing to deal with. It may be one note, but at D tier, it only needs one note to really be successful in this kind of draft league. So it's really cool to see, and I'm very happy to see it on this team.
The Wind and Dragapults pick up yet another excellent new evolved form of a previous Pokemon. It is Dunsparce. Everyone wanted a Dunsparce evolution, and no one could have predicted that it would have just been more Dunsparce, but I am delighted by it. Its stats are excellent, and really the huge selling point of Dunsparce is its Stab Hyper Drill, a signature move made just for it that not only hits through Protect, but also lifts Protect, which I think a lot of people tend to oversee. So in a VGC format, Protect is an incredible move, and if Dunsparce is around, you might not be able to really protect yourself. You might still get hit, which is really something to be concerned about. Another tech, I'm sorry, Cosmos, but this has been something that's discussed, I feel like, in VGC circles, so I hope I'm not giving too much away, but the same Pin Missile tech can be found here. You were scared of the Dunsparce before, well now it has almost max speed. So it's ridiculous. And furthermore, I think this is another Boom Burst user. 2 Ghost types, 2 Telepathy Mons. I wonder what is going on in this draft. This is really fun, really incredible, really spicy B tier, and I love this art also, especially. I love the Dragapults draft. I love Jack Clark. Let's move on.
And move on we shall to Gothorita. So the Portland Timbers picking up Gothorita is a really, really smart draft, simply because even though it's no comparison to really something like Gothitelle, being in the D tier and still having access to things like Shadow Tag, still having access to, I believe it has access to Fake Out if I'm not mistaken still, this thing is a menace. Just not being able to switch out your Pokemon and having to deal with this monster, where you're just slapping Eviolite on it and just be super bulky, is going to be monstrous for teams to deal with. If they just open in a bad spot and go up against their Cerule Edge or their opposing Iron Bundle, like, it's going to be really hard for them to deal with it when they can't really switch. There's very few and far in between Ghost types that have been drafted overall, so you can't really escape from Shadow Tag, and they're just going to start pelting you if you lead wrong. So this is an incredible Pokemon for punishing strategies, and at a budget of D tier, it is just an excellent pickup for this team.
Speaking of really cool, interesting D tiers, we have Cryogonal for the New Jersey Jirachis. This Pokemon is very interesting. It's incredibly specially bulky, but it goes down to physical hits pretty easily. As an ice type, it has incredible benefit from terrestrialization. It's very useful to turn into literally any other type it would enjoy having, so I think that's something that's worth considering with this Pokemon. I believe it gets access to Freeze Dry, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know a lot about what this thing does, but I do know it's a really powerful ice type that is going to be really useful in a really high budget, or low budget, high value D tier for the New Jersey Jirachis.
Continuing the trend of low budget, high value D tiers, we have Toedscool. Now, you guys were lucky enough to listen to me rant the entire time about Toedscool, and you could say the same thing about Toedscool, but slapping Eviolite on it and call it a day. So this thing, all the things that I noted about Toedscool is the same for Toedscool, except he's an even funnier little guy. Like, look at him, he runs on his tentacles. He's so funny. If you haven't seen him in game, like, just go find one. Like, just open up your Scarlet and Violet copy and just find Toedscool just running around. He's one of the goofiest Pokemon ever. I love him so much. But he also just provides that crazy value in the same way you have the Trick Room, you have the Spore, etc. So can't say enough about it. I think it's an excellent pick, especially at a high value D tier.
Up next, it's Toxapex. Threats for generations in the singles format, but something you don't usually see in VGC. I think this is a really smart pickup from the Treasure Town Togepi's. I was saying earlier stuff about bulky grass being really useful. I think having a bulky water on your team is also just a good staple for Draft League in general. And talking about bulk, this thing has excessive bulk. Sure, its HP is low, but if you just max invest that, those defenses on their own are absurd. Again, it got nerfed, it lost access to Scald, as almost every water type did this generation, but it's still really threatening. Not to mention, it's great at Toxic Spikes, it's great at Painful Bunker. There's a lot of really interesting things that this thing can do, not to mention Acupressure. Very curious. Merciless is a fascinating ability that maybe gets used. Limber prevents paralysis, which is nice, but Regenerator on a tank? Are you kidding me? That's amazing. So Toxapex's a mon that we don't see in conventional formats, but I think it's going to be really awesome in this Draft League.
Round 7 truly is the story of the D tiers, and another D tier showing up at a high value pick is Lumineon. Now Lumineon, typically looking at its stats, it's super meh. You just like look at a stat, you're like, man, that's not a lot going on. It's a water type, like that's a good type. But the big thing that gives this thing immense value is Storm Drain. It has, of course, the very nice stats of 69 HP, 69 attack, 69 special attack. But we are looking at that fact that it has that Storm Drain access. Having access to an immunity, and not just any immunity, but one that draws in water moves in particular, is just a really strong thing to have, especially with this generation with things like Iron Bundle just being very, very offensive-oriented water types, where normally we think a water type is a bulky option. So having Lumineon here, just being able to really check some key threats in terms of lineups, things like we've seen Palafin, we've seen Iron Bundle. So Lumineon coming in here, providing that Storm Drain option is just going to be really handy in the draft. So another smart draft in Keegan, like looking at the entire spread, this is just another one of those smart picks that I really appreciate.
Round 6. Another round with a ton of support. I would also like to notice some repeat draft as well. I believe the Windy City Whimsies had Espeon. I know it's a favorite of Grace, but I know that from the BDSP Draft League, Galactic Squids really fell in love with Sneasel and is now on the Sherwood Berry Bandits. Yeah, I can't say enough. This is almost entirely support. Morgrim, Sneasel, Jumpluff, Toadschool, Lumineon, Toxapex as a bulky support. In Gothita, or that's Gotharita, sorry, there's another syllable in there. And it's just really interesting how this turned out. Of course, there's some exceptions like Crocodile and Slacking and Flareon and Dunsparce, which are hard hitters, but overall, just really fun round. Once you get deeper into Draft League, you start to see the curiosities that make it such an interesting format, because we're starting to see these Pokemon like Toadschool, like Morgrim, like Flareon, which you usually have no reason to use, and now they're going to be used here, and they're going to be used well. What do you think?
Yeah, you pretty much hit the nail on the head with it. A lot of times when you get to these weaker points in the Draft League, you're going to start to see a lot of Pokemon obviously can get really high value as supports. So we start to see more supported Pokemon come out of these lower tiers. But it's just as you said, when you start to get to these lower tiers, when you're drafting, you're still looking for these high value picks to get a budget and get an edge off of somebody. So obviously you're not going to find in the D tier something that matches the power of a Roaring Moon or a Fluttermane, but you're still going to get these crazy high value picks like Toadschool, like Sneasel, like Jumpluff, who can really provide a lot for a team. It's just they normally in a format like VGC just get outshined by other things that just do their job, but honestly better because they just have better stats or a more diverse move pool or some really broken ability. But now we get to see these unsung heroes like come out of the lower tiers, and really they could be carries for their team, and no one really realizes it until they start using it. So I'm really excited to see a lot of these picks going forward.
It's only going to get more spicy as we move on to round 7.
Oh, speaking of spicy, round 7 opens us up with a very, very spicy pick in Frostmoth. Now, Frostmoth has a good set of base stats, but everyone really last gen just kind of threw it aside because realistically, like, Ice Bug type is just awful typing. But again, we look at these Pokemon that get glow ups due to the fact that you can just shed your typing away through terrestrialization, and this is the pinnacle of that. This is like the ideal example of what terrestrialization was made for. Getting rid of your Ice Bug type is just incredible, especially with the ability that it has in Ice Scales. So being able to basically just, protected Ice Scales, takes half damage from special moves. So this thing is like a perfect special wall. It's so hard to break on the special attack side, and shifting into just something like Terra Water just sheds all of its problems away. It just gets really comfortable. It gets rid of its fire weakness. It gets rid of its rock weakness. It's just an incredibly defensive option with an incredible amount of offense as well. It gets its opportunity to shine now thanks to terrestrialization, and I'm really excited to see it because it's really what Gen 9 is all about, is like fixing a Pokemon like this.
We had Gothorita last round, now we have Gothita for the Treasure Town Togepi's. Also a D tier, so technically Gothorita is just a stronger pick overall, but when it's already picked up, Gothita still does the exact same things, just as well, just a little bit less stats. You're here for the Frisk, you're here for the Shadow Tag, two of the best possible abilities in Draft League. VGC, we didn't discuss this earlier with other Frisk choices, but VGC tournaments in this generation are open team sheet, so you see all of your opponent's items, making Frisk a worthless ability. In Draft League, which is closed team sheet, and people are running very spicy techs on their Pokemon, Frisk is huge, and just having a Pokemon, doesn't matter what stat package it has, doesn't matter that it's sub 300, that's great. And also Shadow Tag, and not to mention the support moves it gets. Really cool pick from the Togepi's.
So speaking of picks that have literally never skipped leg day a day in their life, we have Stonejourner. Last gen, Stonejourner kind of was like not really around too much in terms of VGC, but I think this is where Stonejourner gets to shine. In a Draft League setting, looking at its stats, sure, it has terrible special defense, and who cares about special attack? It's not even used. But looking at its stats, it's like it's pretty solid, but the big emphasis here is Power Spot. Its ability to just slap a Life Orb on its friend next to it is incredible. It was literally designed for doubles. So having access to that and having access to things like Wide Guard, Stonejourner just allows a team to like take its power and really push it forward even further. So on top of that, you can do things like with Magnezone, you can have Analytic, stacking with Power Spot, stacking with more damage on top of that. That can be absolutely terrifying. And I'm so excited to see a Pokemon that just takes damage and just turns it up to another degree. It's crazy with all this energy that they have. It's great. I love this draft. The draft is so unique here, and this just keeps rounding it out for me really nicely.
Cyclizar, a really interesting Gen 9 Pokemon that hasn't gotten any love in VGC, but has some really unique tools. Its offenses aren't super high, but this is another example of a dragon that just gets access to high base power moves to make up for that, like Overheat and Draco Meteor. Shed Tail with Regenerator is definitely its niche, and it's clearly going to have some use on this team. It's fast, it gets a substitute off, and then it gives that substitute to a teammate, which is just a really interesting mechanic, and of course they couldn't make Cyclizar too powerful, because that might be too strong, especially in the singles format. But in VGC, I think this is a really cool pickup, and we have a fantasy core, baby. That's all we needed. We have a steel type, a fairy type, and a dragon type. Let's go, New Jersey Jirachis.
We're going right back up to the beats here with a pick of Gengar. So we know we talked about Haunter before, but Gengar in particular is a really strong Pokemon in this format in particular, simply because it has access to things like Icy Wind for speed control and Imprison to stop things like Trick Room. We're seeing a pretty quick lineup from the Timbers, so having access to that Trick Room Imprison option is going to be really, really strong in terms of stopping certain teams from ruining their entire game plan. In addition to that, you do get this cool effect of like Iron Bundle plus the Gengar to have a really cool, quick offense that's going to be able to blister through teams really nicely. So I think this is an incredible Pokemon, not just in the offensive perspective that Gengar is normally known for, but a low-key, really powerful support pick coming pretty late in the draft when they start to see everything kind of pan out. So I'm really excited to see Gengar moving forward.
Up next for the Wind and Dragon Pulse, it is Avalugg, a C-tier ice type. Its stats are crazy. That defense is ridiculous, the HP is good, the attack is a little underrated, the speed is low, but that doesn't really matter, and then the special defense is definitely its biggest weakness, but there's solutions, there's things you can do about that. Now, again, this is a situation where ice being the worst defensive type, if you make this into any other type, maybe Steel, maybe Ghost, how are you supposed to get through it? Who knows? Ice Body might have some use up against like the Portland Timbers with their Abomasnow, but besides that, we're not going to see much snow. Sturdy is an interesting thought because Avalugg's going to take any physical hit, but at special hits, it might want that Sturdy for it. Own tempo, I mean, you can swagger it, right? That's an idea. A really interesting pick that I personally would have a really hard time piloting, but I know that Golden Cosmos can do it, and it's just what a thick boy. That's all I gotta say.
No surprises on this round from the New England Nidokings. Finally, with Pelipper, we get to see a Swift Swimmer. Now, I know going back and forth with Mike when we were talking about it, trying to decide on a Swift Swimmer, we did decide on Dreadnought ultimately because it did have an additional glow up this generation. Now, normally the water rock combination is pretty weak in terms of its defensive typing option, but being able to shift out of that into, say, a grass type has been an amazing asset for Dreadnought in particular, and we did see Dreadnought see some good showings in Series 1 because it had that option, and it already had that immense power level. Its base 115 attack is very respectable, and within Swift Swim boosting the power of those water moves and giving it an amazing speed option, this thing can go crazy. In addition to that, it actually has some low-key, very interesting movesets in that it has access to Strong Jaw and some really interesting bite moves, such as, I forget what that move, I think it's Jaw Lock.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Jaw Lock is a really interesting shout for this Pokemon, being able to do pretty big damage with a Dark-type move and deal immense amount of damage on top of that, and also have access to something like, I don't know, Rage Powder plus Shell Smash, goes absolutely insane on top of that. So it's not just dependent on the rain. It has a lot of cool options that I think really emphasize what Draft League is all about, having immense amount of options to deal with all the threats coming forward. So it's not just a one-note Pokemon like you would expect from a Swift Swimmer, and I'm really excited to see how it gets utilized in these different matchups.
Up next, we have a pretty late A tier in the draft. It's Oranguru. This support Pokemon is very unique in its ability Instruct, and besides that, it's just a great normal Psychic type. Seems to be a lot of bulky normal Psychic type supports in this game among Indeedee and Farigiraf, but Oranguru really has its own tools that makes it stand out, including its abilities Inner Focus, Can't Be Flinched, Telepathy takes no damage from its allies, maybe like an Earthquake off of Camerupt or something that we have yet to see, and Symbiosis is really fascinating as well, especially in a Paradox format, where you can attach a booster energy to a Paradoxmon, and then Oranguru just gives their item to the Paradoxmon, which could be something terrifying like Choice Scarf or Life Orb or something. So overall, really cool. It finally enables the Trick Room option here, and I just want everyone to imagine for a second a world where Technician Population Bomb goes off, and then it gets instructed, and another Technician Population Bomb goes off. And that is possible with this draft, which is really, really awful. And I mean that in a good way, in a very complimentary way. So way to go, Milk Biting Mousehold. Very, very cool.
God, moment of silence for the person who has to play into that, because I am scared. But we're moving on to the Sherwood Berry Bandits with Pylosand. I absolutely love this pick. Not only is Pylosand just a funny guy, like look at him, very funny, but it also has initial synergy with that same thing that Cole has, which I think is really cool that they're really building into the synergy. We talk about like, oh, we like the synergies to start to build up. This team is just filled with synergy. So having the Sherwood Berry Bandits being able to slap anything on this Pylosand and make it incredibly bulky just by spamming Surf on it is just really, really cool to see. And it doesn't have to be a super effective hit, so being able to shift into, I don't know, a grass type and absorb these water hits while getting increasingly more bulky is going to be an amazing asset for this team if they really want to capitalize on this flip turn and Surf that they got going on with Sneasel and Palafin. So this is just a really cool pickup, and it's just a really high value C tier with all the synergy on this team.
Up next for my team, the Colorado Cramorant, we picked up Rotom Mow. Again, I was really fixating on cores that I thought were really good, and not only cores, but also strategies. I just picked up one of the best Earthquakers in the draft, and I thought, I need more immunities to Earthquake. So here we are, a Levitate Grass type. Rotom Mow is really special. I think this might be its best generation. Not only is Terrestrialization really useful for it, but being able to ignore Rage Powder is big, being able to ignore Spore is really big, and just the typing is just great in general. This does enable me a Disquake mode, which, as we saw in BDSP with Grache with Rotom and Garchomp, something that's very powerful that you have to respect. If you don't plan for it every week, you might just lose to it. I think this is a lot of fun. I think it makes great use of Terrestrialization and Terra Blast specifically. It could just become a fire type, and boom, it has fire coverage. Overall, really pleased with Rotom Mow. I'm glad that no one else picked it up, and I'm wondering if we're going to see other Rotom forms picked up later in the draft.
Tinkaton coming out with a very high value pick in the Houndoom. Looking at their team, we definitely wanted some kind of fire type coming into for the Toronto Tinkaton, and Houndoom is one of the best that you're going to find in the C tier. Now, it doesn't have amazing bulk, but its offenses are really, really impressive, and being able to shift its Terra typing to something else more defensively, or compounding that offense, is going to be something that really catches people off guard, especially since we're in a closed team sheet format. So this is a pretty good snipe for people who were really looking for that offensive fire type and looking at their budget and being like, oh no, I'm running out of money. This was an excellent swipe up from the Toronto Tinkaton for this round, because people were going to start looking at those C tiers for those high value picks, and I really love that they scooped this up now.
I was just speaking about Rotom forms, and wouldn't you know it, Cotton following suit, picking up Rotom Wash, arguably the strongest Rotom form, and it is going to have a great showing here. It has the same stats as all the other appliance forms, not base Rotom, but all of the other ones, great stats, but this one arguably has the best typing. Water and Electric, only weak to grass because of Levitate. And beyond that, again, like the other Rotom forms, makes great use of Terra Blast, has support moves like Will-O-Wisp, another bulky Water, which is really interesting, but again, they don't share all of their weaknesses. In fact, they only share grass, which is pretty interesting. Another pretty bulky mon that HP isn't quite at the 100 benchmark like all the other Pokemon besides Grafaiai is, but those defenses more than make up for it, and I'm certain that Cotton's going to make great use of Rotom Wash.
Windy City Whimsies pick up Greedent, a C-tier Pokemon here. Now, controversially to the rest of the team, this is a very slow Pokemon, but it's within good reason. Normally, if you have a full fast team, you are severely weak to teams that were focusing on Trick Room. And there were quite a few Trick Roomers that were drafted throughout this entire process. So picking up a very slow Pokemon, especially one that has such a very solid stat line outside of its speed, is just a really good pickup for anti-Trick Room strategies. No one can just sit there and say, oh, I'm just going to put Trick Room onto this team and deal with the rest of it because they're all so fast. Now they have to deal with Greedent, and Greedent can be an absolute chunky menace. You can either go offensive with the Belly Germ option, which is really powerful, especially with strategies like the Fake Out strategy and things like that, or you can, of course, just go with a very defensive set on Greedent and really wall out and stall the rest of the team. And in addition to that, it does look like that it's kind of just a really thick Pokemon akin to Dondozo. But I know that's the trend that we're looking at here, and we're all wondering, when is Dondozo going to get drafted up? I know that we see the Tatsu here, but we still haven't hit it yet. But at the same time, this is still an excellent, bulky Pokemon to pick up, and I'm really excited to see what kind of movesets that Grouche puts onto this Pokemon in particular.
The final pick of this round is for the Glimwood Glimmets, picking up Lurantis. What a cool mon. What a fun mon. Again, a really great grass type. It gets access to Contrary. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it lost Superpower this game, but it still has Leaf Storm. So like you can still make great use of that ability. I love just really solid grass types, and it's a cool having a nice physical one, but can also run a special option thanks to Leaf Storm Contrary. Really smart pick. It's nice to have something that's immune to Spore and Rage Powder and whatever other powder moves you need to be immune to. I think the Glimmets draft is looking really threatening, and their aesthetic is so on point. I think that's the biggest strength of the Glimmets at the moment.
All right, so round 9 recap. Let's take a look at these picks. Now, this time we're starting to see more budget options start to get rounded out here, which is really nice to see. Like, we're starting to see the very creative picks in the draft. Honestly, my favorite part of the draft is this round 7 to 8 time, because you start to see Pokemon like Pylosand, Pokemon like Frostmoth in particular is one of the surprising picks to see. A lot of like Gen 9, in my opinion, glow-ups were drafted this round in particular, especially because we also emphasize like things like Rotom even have a glow up in that they can get rid of the grass type if they don't need it, but grass type is really useful this gen. So a lot of really cool, interesting picks that I'm really excited to see all these team synergies come together utilizing these more budgety options.
Yeah, now that we're beyond 6, which is like the standard team size, now we're starting to see the creative things and the modes getting fleshed out, more options. I think, as you were calling out before in the draft, the Sherwood Berry Bandits are just loading on the synergies. It's really frightening how much stuff that they can do with only just 4 of their Pokemon, which I think is kind of the point of a VGC draft format. Overall, really impressed with all of these. Some iconic Pokemon getting picked up. I feel like every time that like we were talking about, oh, like there's an Eevee evolution, is there going to be another one? And then Cotton got Vaporeon, and it's like, oh, there's a Rotom form, is there going to be another one? And it was Rotom Wash. It's just great. I'm the identities of these teams are really starting to come together, and these last 3 rounds are going to be full of spice, and that's exactly what I want to be seeing. With that being said, let's take a look at round 8. It's Frostlass. I mean, the key thing here is that it furthers the aesthetic. The aesthetic here is fantastic, but additionally, having a ghost type in this comp, I think is pretty powerful. I think there's having that immunity to 2 types and the ability to switch out of the shadow tags that are just getting piled on apparently is really nice. Its stats are kind of middling across the board except for speed, but that also gives you some flexibility. You can run special moves if those are more effective, or you can run physical moves if those are more effective. And support move pool is great with stuff like Icy Wind and Will-O-Wisp. The Glimmets are going to make great use of Frostlass.
Finally, it happened. The draft of Dondozo. They finally did it. Pulling the trigger this late in the draft for Dondozo, we saw it coming. You could see it. You picked Tatsu first round. It's going to happen. And it did happen. We were wondering if this whole game of chicken was going to pay off, and it clearly did for Grache. They brought it together. The team is really well-rounded around Dondozo, having access to Revival Blessing, having access to Masquerada to deal with one of its checks. It's just a really, really menacing Pokemon. And honestly, you could just like look at this slide. I didn't even have to talk. You could have just like cued the Star Wars Empire music and it would have told the whole story. This thing is incredible. And I definitely am terrified for anyone having to deal with this. I hope you realize you should have got checks to it throughout this draft and you have answers, because you're going to need them.
Yeah, I'm going to talk over you on this slide and say if you didn't draft Dondozo to stop this from happening, you had to draft an answer. And it's silly that this happened, but we let it happen. I don't know what to say. So
far.
Yeah, there's going to be some Tatsudon. And yeah, and that's the thing too, is like how it's an A tier, and we had to make them both A tier because of how powerful they are in a format, so it had to be expensive to get this combination. But it's just like, if you don't have the other one, the A tier is so not worth it. And the fact that Grace got away with this, it's the narrative. It's great. It's, yeah.
Everyone's a coward. No one wanted to hate draft this. They just couldn't bring themselves to do it.
I'll speak for myself. I couldn't do it. Colorado Cramorant couldn't do it. And you know who else couldn't do it because they had a different water type in mind? It was the Sydney Sylveons. They picked up Quillfish, and I'm a big fan of Quillfish. I think Water Poison is a great defensive typing, not to mention you got to Intimidate. With the Hisuian Brethren hasn't made it into the game yet, and they won't be entering the draft at any point if they are made available, but I love this thing. It gets Icy Wind, Destiny Bond, Explosion, Thunder Wave, just to name a few moves off the top of my head that I know it has, and it's just super cool. I just like Quillfish a lot. That makes 3 water types for the Sydney Sylveons, which is pretty interesting. However, they're all pretty different. There's different secondary typings, and they all do different things. And for a team that loves to have bulky Pokemon, I think something like Quillfish to slow down the game with Intimidates is really very useful for the Sydney Sylveons.
Now that we're D tier and we're looking at very high value picks, you can literally not think of anyone who maximizes value more than Ditto. Ditto on any given day and the right piloting can just become an A tier. Thanks to Imposter and it just dropping onto the board, it no longer is burdened by having to click transform, and now it can just jump into the right slot, copy the guy across from him, and be like, hello, I am you now, I have all your moves. So this thing is the definition of high value. Just like waking up one morning and just feeling like an A tier, it just gets to do it. So there's not much to say about Ditto. It just gets to be whoever the pilot decides that it is, wherever it lands, and it's a really, really amazing robbery from a lot of people who are looking for value.
Up next, one of my all-time favorite Pokemon, probably my favorite bug type, it's Vivillon. I really like this thing. It's really sad that it lost its signature move in this generation, being Powder, but it's just so cute and so great, and it has so many great support options, not to mention Compound Eyes Sleep Powder. That's the main appeal. That's really the big thing that pushes this thing from D tier to C tier, but I'm a big fan of Friend Guard. I'm a big fan of Rage Powder. I'm a big fan of Tailwind and Hurricane in the Rain, and all sorts of really cool things that Vivillon can do. This is probably my favorite pick, honestly. This is the thing that I'm happiest that I got. I figured it wouldn't get picked up by anyone else, but I just love Vivillon so much I couldn't say no. So that's my pick for this round.
All right, so the Sherwoodberry Bandits, they pick up Stantler. I keep emphasizing this idea of value when we're getting into this level of tiers, looking at the C and D tiers, and Stantler really is just like one of the definitions of value. Having access to Intimidate, Frisk, even Sap Sipper, and a plethora of utility moves, this thing is such a good pick in the D tier. Like, I'm surprised, honestly, that like even now, it would have been like, I would think an early draft than this, but just seeing this thing come out so late is just so amazing. Having access to even things like, we can go through so many support moves. Imprison, even like things like Confuse Ray. It has access to Skill Swap. Skill Swap to me is a crazy one. Just being able to Skill Swap Intimidate onto your partner, for example, if they don't need their ability anymore, and reprocking it is just amazing. And then switching out, getting more Intimidate. It just goes insane on its own. And it's just a great value pick in the D tier. So kudos to them for picking it up, especially seeing that option and scooping it up. It's a great one.
Speaking of really cool D tier Pokemon, it's Bramblegast from the Milk Biting Mousehold. Its HP is kind of low, its attack is pretty great, and its other stats overall are perfectly fine. It's a really solid value D tier. It's kind of on that borderline between D and C, but doesn't have enough that pushes it over the edge. However, I'm confident that Cleffa can find that secret tech that makes us reconsider that maybe it should have been in the C tier. Wind Rider is a really fascinating new ability that I'm sure has some creative uses that none of us have thought about, but also Infiltrator is a good classic if you want to hit through subs sub, you want to hit behind screens, Brambleghast can do the job for you. So I'm a big fan of this. Grass Ghost is a cool typing, cool design, cool pick. Let's go Mouseholds.
So looking at defensive Pokemon in the rain, there weren't a lot of grass types to go around, and you definitely want a grass type on a very rain-oriented squad. So outside of Toadsquirrel, we looked at the options, and Appleton seemed like a really good defensive C-tier pick. It hard walls everything that it can come across, and even if it doesn't, being able to Terra Shift out to a type that can hard wall things, and especially paired with Thick Fat, goes incredibly insane. So being able to have access to Thick Fat, resisting those ice and fire attacks, and then shifting to a type that really benefits from Thick Fat, having access to Leech Seed and the like, is just a really powerful low-key pick. And knowing that not a lot of people can always get that Terra Grass off or protect it from Leech Seed, Appleton has the potential to go insane against some matchups. So I'm really excited to see this Pokemon, especially late in the draft. This is an ideal Pokemon to pick up this late.
And here we are, Skuntank. What a delightful D tier. Poison Dark is a phenomenal typing, and this thing has a very strangely diverse move pool, which is very interesting. Stench, a few people know that it actually increases a flinch chance. It introduces a flinch chance to moves that don't usually flinch. Aftermath is fun and interesting and punishes you for getting the KO, and I don't think Cosmos is going to use Keen Eye, but who knows? It could happen. It's really deceptively bulky, and again, Poison Dark is a great defensive typing. This is a Pokemon that doesn't really necessarily need to Terrestrialize, which is nice because that gives you a ton of different Terra type options for a draft league where you know what your opponent has, right? So overall, really cool pick. There's a ton of things you can do with it. I'm sure Cosmos is going to pilot it very well.
One of the core menaces of Series 1, Garchomp, coming in super late in the draft, but coming in not undervalued. So having the Garchomp and having just a draft pick of an A tier this late is really nice because you get to scope out the entire roster of teams and think about what would be a great, excellent A tier to really bring a power into your roster. And Garchomp's no slouch. Garchomp, there's a reason why he was such a high value pick in Series 1, having a base attack of 130, a really good speed tier, and just over the base 100, which is just a critical benchmark for a lot of offensive Pokemon. And having an amazing plethora of bulk means you have a very flexible amount of movesets. So yeah, the casual drop of just throwing Garchomp into your team this late in the draft is just an incredible thing to bring to a team. And seeing it paired with things like Abomasnow, like this team is like really bulky, like surprisingly bulky. And Garchomp kind of slots itself really nicely into a team with a lot of bulk like this. So I'm definitely excited to see it go just crazy in this draft in particular.
Up next, Spiritomb for the New Jersey Jirachis. A type combination being Ghost and Dark that formerly had no weaknesses, but now is only weak to Fairy. Interestingly, though, not every team got their Fairy. So, in a lot of situations, this thing will be very hard to take out with 108 in both defenses and 50 HP that you can boost with some EVs. Pressure is a fine ability that you can make good use of, but Infiltrator is very interesting, once again hitting behind screens and Substitute. It has a great support move pool, but it's also capable of dealing pretty decent damage with decent attack stats. While this Pokemon may be hard to catch, its accessibility in terms of sliding on a team is very, very high. The New Jersey Jirachis are going to be using it very successfully.
HE Pikachu's picking up Gyarados, another A tier slotting itself in this late in the draft. Gyarados is just a always very high value pick, having the Intimidate to be an excellent support Pokemon or just a good switch in general, even if on an offensive type of moveset, or just the Moxie if you're going to look to just really set up Gyarados to just snowball out of control. This thing, it paired up with its move pool and also having Terrestrialization, giving it finally access to a pretty decent flying move outside of Bounce. This thing is a really solid pickup for any team looking to like just round out the team really nicely. It's just a very good catch-all kind of pick that is really valuable in these draft leagues.
Then we have Sunflora, an excellent partner for Torkoal that on any other team probably wouldn't have done as well. But on this team with Torkoal, it's phenomenal. A lot of people underrate Sunflora's damage in Trick Room and Sun. Of course, Sunroom is a demanding concept. You have to have the right tools to make it happen, but Kira got those tools, and Sunflora really shines there. Solar Power, Life Orb, and incredible move pool based off 105 special attack, and this is a pretty slept-on Pokemon. I think this is going to shatter some weeks. Some opponents are not going to be prepared for it, and Solar Power Sunflora is going to decimate them. That being said, it's also a grass type, so it gets a decent host of regular supportive grass type attacks as well. Chlorophyll is going to be tricky to pull off with that base 30 speed, but this is just a really strong pickup, and it's got such a good disposition. I don't think Kira can be upset with this pick whatsoever.
Rounding out this round, we have Salazzle. Salazzle is kind of one of those picks that I was really surprised how good it actually is just in VGC in general. Having the poison fire typing has been really valuable this generation for dealing with some very critical mons. And in addition to that, it's a really, really good Dondozo chat. So that's why it always came into VGC really nicely, is you could slap it onto a team to round it out if you needed fake out, but also wanted a nice surprising check to Dondozo. So this thing can just rip through bulky teams if they're looking to play a little too defensive. Salazzle hard punishes that. Having access to either Toxic or Toxic Spikes, having even access to Corrosion where it can poison Pokemon that it normally can't poison. This thing actually is just a bane for anyone who's looking to play a defensive strategy, and I'm really excited to see it on a team that's really looking to capitalize on some different matchups and really play to its outs in terms of like the very well-rounded structure it has.
And that's it for round 8. I personally was really surprised by the number of A tiers that came out here. We had Dondozo, which was going to happen eventually, and we talked about it a lot, and that's its own thing. But seeing Garchomp and Gyarados this late was like really fascinating. I really wasn't expecting it. But besides that, these are all just really fun, really interesting, very, very cool for draft league picks. And again, as we were saying before, that's my favorite part of the draft. And just looking at the screen puts a smile on my face.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head with that. The D tiers were something that I expected to shine in this round. And as you said, they're always very creative picks, and we're excited to see how they get used. I really do think the story of this round is the A tiers themselves, the Gyarados, the Garchomp, and especially, we talked at length already, and we both talked about it on that slide. It was so important, the Dondozo. So, like, seeing these A tiers come out this late is a really just understanding of the full draft as a whole. From these particular coaches, and a really impressive idea to come into it to really hold themselves back and not just panic scoop the early tiers like some other teams do. They decided to just wait it out and pick up some high value B and C tiers, ultimately coming back in and sweeping up, being like, oh, I can just grab this now, and it's a safe pick for them to actually make use of. So I really love that thought process, and it really shows how much people talked and how much they trust their front office to help them make these decisions. Because like sometimes if you're on your own, maybe you just go for the normal draft order, but seeing that people just loop back around is just really cool.
And here we are, round 9. We're coming close to the end.
So round 9, we have Persian. Persian is an excellent support Pokemon coming in the D tier towards the tail end of the draft. Just having access to really cool support moves like Fake Out, for example, is just a really, really powerful thing to really bring together a team. It's pretty unassuming in terms of the rest of its stats, but throw a Focus Sash on this thing and look at its speed tier, and you can't really go wrong with it. It's just a really decent, high-value pick.
Up next is Tropius. Speaking of really unique Pokemon that thrive particularly with Torkoal, another grass type, makes a ton of sense on this team. Really, really interesting. There was a moment like a week or two ago that there was just a lot of Tropius on the showdown ladder, and people were testing something out, and I'm still not entirely sure what their aim was, but as far as bulky grasses go, Grass Flying isn't a bad typing, and it still gets access to screens and Leech Seed and things like that, and I'm really curious to see how Kira's going to make use of Tropius, and I'm sure she will pretty successfully.
Ichi Pikachus finally pick up their namesake Pokemon in Pikachu. So seeing the Gyarados, I was a little nervous looking at this team being like, well, I guess they have Rage Powder and Ground Immunity in Toad School, but you don't always want to rely on that. But seeing that another high value Pokemon in the Lightning Rod for Liz in particular was a great pick to pair up with the Gyarados. And I'm glad they waited on that to see the landscape and be like, oh, I can of course get Pikachu, so let's scoop up Gyarados last round because I know I'm going to get Pikachu next. So that is an excellent foresight in terms of like their drafting order that they're looking at, because they're like, well, if they're picking Gyarados, no one's going to pick Pikachu at this point. So it's a perfect Pokemon to pair with a lot of Pokemon on their team, especially considering both Gyarados and Terraflying Roaring Moon is an option. This thing adds excellent protection to the team, and I'm really happy to see it.
Here is Scyther for the New Jersey Jirachis, a very interesting mon that I kind of wish got sharpness in this gen, but it's okay that it didn't because its brother Cleavor did. However, Cleavor not going to be in our draft. Regardless, really interesting. Bug Flying, not a great typing. Generally, if you're a Bug Flying type, there's got to be something that you do. And the thing that Scyther does is it's pretty fast and it's pretty strong, and even makes pretty decent use of Eviolite. It gets access to Swords Dance, so it can hit pretty hard. Overall, just a really interesting, solid D tier, and I'm pretty happy that the New Jersey Jirachis got it.
Berserker coming in for the D tier, and Berserker honestly is pretty unassuming typically in these type of formats. But what you expected to see is, because of the Terra typing in particular, you look at the spread, you don't really see many things that Berserker capitalizes on, namely its Steely Spirit ability. Steely Spirit, of course, boosting steel attacks by 1.5 times, which seems like a lot, and you would expect it to be on a team that's paired up with another like steel stab user. But a lot of these Pokemon really benefit from shifting into steel, so being able to bring in like a Terra Blast or even like a Stab Iron Head would be absolutely insane. So seeing this, and also knowing that it's probably a potential snipe because there's a lot of other good, powerful steel Pokemon in the higher tiers, this thing actually provides some decent utility and can provide some offensive options as well. Looking at that base 110 attack and Tough Claws, you can build a pretty offensive Berserker if you want to. So it's a pretty nice, flexible Pokemon, especially coming into the D tier. So good to see it.
Up next, we have Knucklestack in the D tier, everyone's favorite Minecraft pig. Now, you look at it and you think, okay, it's not Garganacl, what can it do? And the answer is pretty much everything Garganacl does. Its move pool is incredibly similar, it has the same abilities, and its defenses get pretty comparable when you attach an Eviolite. So I think this is a really smart pickup for the Wind and Dragapulse. Just, again, bulky rock isn't really something that people go for, but Knucklestack and Garganacl just has a really specific niche of having the perfect tools for a tank Pokemon that just happen to have a bad tank type. But loop back around, we have Terastallization. So Knucklestack is going to win some games, and it's going to be pretty funny to see, and I'm just really excited to see what Cosmos does with it.
New England Noodle Kings picked Honchkrow in this round. Honchkrow, while it's not as high sung as, say, its counterpart Murkrow, which for most people is kind of ironic because Murkrow's a pre-evolution, but Murkrow having access to Prankster really opened up its niche as one of the most powerful Tailwind users. Honchkrow doesn't exactly have that option, but where it doesn't have that utility, it does make up for it in its crazy offense. So even though it has a pretty slow speed, that base 125 attack, when paired up with things, for example, like Sucker Punch, mean that this thing can go absolutely bonkers. And especially because there's a nice, excellent Trick Room option set in this particular team, having access to that Stab Sucker Punch that's really powerful, and just a nice plethora of offensive moves to capitalize on, and having Moxie, this thing can really set up on people and go insane. So I'm definitely excited to see it on this particular team because I think it rounds it up really nicely. Also, having the addition of a flying type can never really go wrong when you have some critical ground weaknesses. So it's pretty cool to see this thing coming into the team and really rounding it out nicely.
Up next is Dragalge for the Milk Biting Mousehold. Really cool Pokemon, excellent unique typing, great ability and adaptability. Even Poison Touch might get some use depending on the week, but just a really solid, bulky Pokemon. I think ever since fairies were introduced, the niche for dragons kind of went less offensive and more defensive. Being a dragon type, you resist really key attacks, including fire, water, electric, and grass. Poison doesn't really make your matchups that much worse, and it gives you even more resistances to stuff like fighting. I think Dragalge is a really interesting pick, and with this Trick Room mode too, it's going to be doing insane damage with adaptability, which has really unique interactions with Terastallizing. If you're not familiar, adaptability, when you Terastallize, only boosts your Terra type, and none of your other original stabs. But that's a lot of damage, especially considering if you go Dragon, Trick Room's up, Dragon, Terra, Dragalge, adaptability, it's gonna nuke everything. I love this pick, and again, I can't wait to see Cleffa pilot it.
Sherwood Berry Bandits really don't want people to have Intimidate anywhere on the spread because they picked a third Intimidator in their roster in Squawkabilly. Ooh. So Squawkabilly in particular is kind of interesting because I've seen some weird talks of people acting like that because it has Intimidate and Parting Shot, that it's basically Incineroar. It doesn't compare in stats, but that utility is something that people need to worry about. Having the ability to just, Parting Shot and then come back in and Intimidate and then Parting Shot again is a really powerful tool set that kind of gets slept on. It's pretty unassuming in terms of its stats, but having that particular defensive and utility niche, in addition to its other moves, which I have no idea what it really has, honestly, but I'm sure it has a plethora of utility moves that can also capitalize on it, but I do know it for that Parting Shot and Intimidate synergy, and it does quite a bit, so that's really good.
Up next for the Colorado Cramorant, one of our very last picks is Pyroar. I think it's no secret that I've been obsessed with cores. I can't stop talking about type cores, and I introduced a grass type. Of course I'm trying to get a fire type, and I think Pyroar was easily the best fire type in the D tier, unless you wanted the offensive Flareon. In my opinion, those were just the two best D tier fires, without a doubt. Pyroar is really interesting. Its bulk is pretty okay, and while its attack is quite low, if you really want to go crazy, you can run Moxie and like patch that up, no problem. Really, special attack is where it shines. It gets fire moves, which are already great, but also stab, hyper voice, incredibly useful. It also gets stuff like snarl, which makes it very useful as a support, and unnerve is really awesome in Draft League. I can't say that enough because type berries are so impactful, and just berries in general, just blocking those. And rivalry is kind of cute and interesting because while in general it's a really risky ability to run, there's a number of Pokemon that are always one gender or are more likely to be so. So when my opponents are facing into me, I think they need to start considering, like, if they have a starter like Grace with Meowscarada, for example, she should probably put in the work to get a female Meowscarada. Despite the fact that it's more rare, Pyroar could be doing more damage to it if I decide to run Rivalry for that sneaky little tech there. So I'm happy with Pyroar, can't wait to use it.
Toronto Tinkaton's pick up Altaria, a excellent defensive Pokemon this generation. So Altaria is kind of unassuming at first. You look at its defensive spread, it's really nice, and it is a really powerful utility Pokemon in that regard. Dragon Flying would normally be kind of a crutch for it being so weak to ice, but for a defensive Pokemon in particular, but because you have Terrestrialization, you can always change out of that, no problem, and utilize its crazy defensive utility. Having access to things like Roost, and for some reason this generation, I believe also having access to Will-O-Wisp, this thing actually can go pretty crazy. So having all that crazy utility on top of that, and even low-key having a Perish Song strat in your back pocket is a really nice thing to have across the board. So I am really excited to see what they decide to do with this.
Up next is Donphan for the Sydney Sylveons. Donphan was my go-to if I didn't get Crocodile. I know they're 2 tiers apart, but I was like, it's got pretty good attack, and it's bulky, sturdy, can be useful. It gets really silly coverage, like Play Rough and Ice Shard, that I'm not really sure why it gets it, but it does, so that's pretty cool. Really a high-value D tier, in my opinion, as far as offensive ground damage. I don't think there's anything better in that tier for that job. And with its move pool and its pretty good bulk, it's pretty good stats. I mean, you can put Assault Vest on it, and it's got great bulk across the board. This is a really solid mon, and I think it benefits the Sydney Sylveons pretty well. It doesn't quite meet that benchmark of 100 base HP like I like all these mons to have, but that defense stat more than makes up for it, so I'm really pleased with Cotton's choices in this draft so far, and I can't wait to see what their last pick is.
Whimsy City Whimsy got to pick up Masquerain, a D tier within the space, and honestly, you can't get better in terms of budget D tiers that are going to provide you Intimidate. Swakabilly was already gone, so you obviously can go to the Masquerain, which I think does round out defensively like pretty nicely. The I'm forgetting if it's Bug Flying. I think it's Water Flying.
It's Bug Flying.
Or no, it's okay.
It loses the water type for some reason.
Yeah, it's just a water. Yeah, nice rounded water type for this, and just a really solid pickup overall if you're looking for that utility Intimidate.
Up next, we were talking about it earlier in the draft, but here's Haunter. Haunter in general, you'd probably never want to use on your own, but in Draft League, it's a great pick. It's in the D tier, but it's fast and it's strong, and its defenses are terrible, but you just run Focus Sash, and unlike Gengar getting nerfed in later gens, this one still has Levitate. It does pretty much everything Gengar does, but just like a little bit not as good, but it kind of doesn't matter because the niche that it fulfills is so valuable. And once again, this aesthetic is completely unbeatable.
So round 9 recap, we're looking at a lot of utility D tier picks and seeing what the minds of people that we're going into for the future of the draft. You have some offensive picks, you have some defensive picks. Either way, there were really big value pickups here. My favorite ones personally were the Knacklesackle, who, like Rich already said during his explanation, this thing, the Minecraft pig, is literally just budget Garganacl. It does all the same things, just a little weaker, but that's not going to really make much of a difference when it's just walling out the opposing team. The other one I want to give a big shout to is that Tropius. So I know Rich emphasized that Tropius was coming up on the ladder. The reason why that was is because it was one of the best checks to Dondozo in particular, because Dondozo really didn't have a good way to hit it outside of, like, say, Order Up, which you can always Terra to avoid if needed, depending on the moveset, and it avoided that Fissure Dondozo that was running around the ladder. In addition to that, it was really hard to take down simply because Harvest existed. So in addition to that, you have that berry option to just keep chugging berries and then constantly being a thorn in their side while leech seeding them. It was honestly one of the premier bulky Pokemon at the time, and it was really cool to see it finally occupy a niche because it had the option to shift Terra types in if it was outside the Dondozo matchup. So it was really cool to see this get picked up, and it's an excellent check to Dondozo in particular, and I'm excited to see that creative pick especially.
Yeah, I think pretty much everything you said is spot on. I do want to note that I believe the Windy City Whimsies have 3 repeat members now from their BDSP draft, which is like really awesome. Masquerain didn't get a whole lot of use in BDSP, but it was a threat in itself, and it has a lot of utility with Intimidate and Unnerve and Tailwind. It's just, and String Shot even, I think, is just a really good move that people forget about. Another note that I want to make is that Berserker is here, and Berserker is not legal in VGC Series 1 or Series 2 because it's not in the Pokédex. Now, we had a number of Pokemon in the tier list that were allowed, like Quagsire and Cinderace and Charizard, but we've yet to see them in the draft. So as it stands, Berserker is the only Pokemon that is not allowed in regular VGC and is in our draft. That being said, it's time for round 10, the final round of the draft. Here we have Rotom Fan in the C tier. Now, here's the thing. If you're Dell and you're looking at Glamora and you're like, ugh, I hate ground type moves. I gotta get rid of them. Look no further than Rotom Fan. It's a flying type. It has Levitate. You give it Air Balloon. You're never going down to a ground type move ever, and Glamora is safe. Glamora is free. That's all you need. Jokes aside, I think Rotom Fan's pretty cool. I think it struggles as being the appliance form of Rotom that probably has the weakest move overall, which is Air Slash. It's not bad, but it doesn't do a whole lot of work with it, but I bet Dell can make it work. Besides that, it has the stats of all the other Rotoms and a fantastic typing. Really, Electric Flying is very, very good. Can't wait to see this thing in action.
Rounding out Grace's draft, we have the Cloyster. Cloyster in the D tier is, even though the stats wouldn't tell you, if you know anything about Cloyster, you know it's one of the scariest offensive Pokemon that you can possibly draft. And the reason for that is it has access to an amazing offensive setup move in Shell Smash. So Shell Smash, of course, you just pop it and you go insane because you shed your defenses, you get some crazy offensive stats, and you start to pop off. But what really makes Cloyster unique in the Shell Smash option is that it has access to the ability Skill Link. So Skill Link making those 2 to 5 hit moves, always hitting 5 times and having access to things like Rock Blast and Icicle Spear can really allow it to just go insane. Icicle Spear in particular, always being a base 125 offensive move that hits multiple times and is 100% accuracy, is going to go absolutely insane to teams who need like that ice check. So like, yeah, Skill Link being kind of like an item, if people are familiar with using loaded dice hits about 4 to 5 times every time. This will always hit 5 times. This is the original loaded dice option. So anytime if you guys were watching any sort of thing, you're seeing Baxcalibur utilize Icicle Spear in that way. This is just the OG. This is the original to do that kind of strat with it, and it's still immensely powerful and incredibly high value. You also have access to Overcoat as well, which is essentially safety goggles. So if you want to lean into that defensive option, people still have to respect you for that offense, but you can just go defensive with it as well, because look at base 180 defense. It's going to go nuts. It's really powerful in that way.
The final pick for the Sylveons is Flapple. Arguably, as far as stats go, this is probably the most oddball here, but I kind of like it. It still gets access to a lot of the same utility stuff that Appleton does. It's just more offensively oriented. Granted, its use of Hustle in Gen 8 probably is going to be a lot harder to work with because you can't Dynamax to ensure that Hustle boosted moves hit, but Ripen and Gluttony are still pretty interesting. I'd be curious if there's some sort of, I wonder if Screamtail gets Gravity or something, like with Grav Apple. I'd love to see a strat like that, but I'm not sure it's on the team. Maybe it is. I honestly don't have much to say about Flapple besides he's a funny little guy and he can do pretty okay damage.
Ice-Q is the pickup for Toronto Tinkaton, and Ice-Q, while looks pretty unassuming, has a pretty particular niche. Has a very good time against physical Pokemon, and that Ice Face essentially works like a disguise for them, so protecting them from that physical damage for the initial hit, and of course gets reset if it snows. While I don't see much snow support on the Toronto Tinkaton in particular, outside of potentially just weather setting by default, you can of course set up the Belly Drum just like you could with the Titan, and having that Ice Face for protection against very physical heavy teams will be a really nice niche to pair up with the Flamigo and add that co-star power. So that is a pretty cool niche to occupy. It's nice to have a backup like that for the Belly Drum, and I think it adds a pretty nice layered option to the team. So pretty high value pick in the D tier for the Toronto Tinkaton.
The last pick for my team, the Colorado Cramorant, is Klotzer. I gave you the warning. I told you I was obsessed with cores. I picked up Rotom, I picked up Pyroar, had to be a water type. Klotzer was a really prime water type in the C tier, which I just happened to still have a slot for. It has a very respectable special attack stat that gets boosted by its ability when you use moves with Pulse in their name, and I think Aura Sphere is one of them as well. Heal Pulse gets boosted as well. It's a really interesting Pokemon, and it's not the bulkiest water type, but it has decent bulk, especially if you invest in it. The speed is like really middling, which is actually, I think, great for this team where I have a lot of extremes. So I'm excited to use Klotzer. I've never used it before, but it's great, and it also fleshes out like my color palette of my team. I'm just pleased. I like this draft. It's great. Very happy overall with my pick.
The Sherwood Berry Bandits pick out and kind of a very slept on support Pokemon in the Electrode. Electrode has a blistering 150 speed and a support pool that matches it pretty nicely. Having access to even things like Screech or Screens in particular is a really, really cool niche for it. And I know it has other plethora of support moves, and I just can't name them off the top of my head. We've been through so much data. I can't really think of it now, but like he has so many different support options, and just having that speed is going to be a nice way to round out a team that is a really solid offense. And hell, worst comes to worst, you just explode. So just go by default. Rotown Orb does in fact pop off in that way.
Here is Annihilate at home because we couldn't get Annihilate because the Dragapults picked it up. The Milk Biting Mousehold pick up Primeape. Primeape's a really great D tier, and it actually put in a lot of work for the Pacific Piplups back in the BDSP draft. It's still a pretty decent mon, and now it has access to Eviolite, and like while its bulk is terrible, you might as well because nothing else on the team needs the Eviolite, so it's pretty neat. Something to note is that it is a little bit faster than Annihilate, so if you want to do like a Scarf set with Defiant and just spam close combat or something against a team that's fighting weak, that's a great option to have. It's a pretty cool mon, pretty cool first gen Pokemon, decent fighting type. It's a pig monkey. What more do you want?
New England Nidoking picked up Muck in the D tier. So Muck, while originally is pretty unassuming, we have a pretty decent Trick Room mode going on here, so Muck kind of slots itself in just fine. In addition to that, Poison type this generation in particular has proven itself to be a really, really strong defensive typing, and look at Muck's entire bulk as a whole, it goes pretty hard. Low-key though, Poison Touch and Poison Jab in particular, I think are a very slept-on combination, giving Muck a 50% chance to actually poison targets. It's a really good pick against this Dondozo that we saw that was Complete Menace, and a team that would normally be weak to it actually has a niche against it. So it is a very powerful pickup and does provide a plethora of options and utility in bulk that I think otherwise is pretty slept on, especially in a D tier, which is a nice high-value pick.
For the Wind and Dragapults, their last pick is Venomoth. I knew personally that in my draft that if I missed Vivillon, I would pick up Venomoth, and I think Venomoth is just a really great bug type. It's kind of similar to Vivillon in a lot of ways, not just by design and just things that it can do. Granted, it doesn't have quite as accurate of a sleep powder, but it can do a lot more damage. You shouldn't let Venomoth just set up. It does get access to Quiver Dance, and with Tinted Lens, it doesn't matter if you resist, you're going to get hit by that Bug Buzz, by that Sludge Bomb, or whatever other coverage moves it happens to have. Wonder Skin is also a really interesting ability, as is Shield Dust. Venomoth has a lot of utility that I think a lot of people sleep on, and it's just a really awesome C tier, and I think it rounds out Jack's draft very nicely.
The Portland Timberbird, I don't know if this is a meme pick or not, but Delibird mixed with Iron Bundle just kind of gives me a nice bit of joy. Delibird, of course, like I said at the beginning of this, had a very big glow up this generation in Iron Bundle. But Delibird, as a D tier pick, is not a bad utility mon in general. It does, I believe, get access to Fake Out. I don't know Delibird's complete move pool, but I do think it has access to some pretty decent support moves that it can bring to the table. And I don't know, if worst comes to worst, you do just throw presents at people, so that's always really nice.
Here it is, a lovely giraffe for the New Jersey Jirachis. Gotta get that J sound alliteration. New Jersey Jirachis picking up Giraffe Rig. What more could you want? This mon's really good. The introduction of Frigoraph has only buffed this mon, as now it holds Eviolite, and it's kind of really bulky with that. It's really nice. Its damage isn't bad. It's got good stats all around. Its abilities aren't quite as good as Frigoraph, but they're still great. Inner Focus is kind of like Armor Tail Jr. in the sense that you can't be faked out, and that's kind of nice. Early Bird, waking up early if you're up against a sleep-using team, is super helpful. Sap Sipper for that grass immunity is great. Overall, a really good mon that, again, just got buffed by the addition of its evolution, and I think it's very cute as well.
Peachy Pikachu's picking up an amazing pickup, honestly, in the D tier for their team, specifically in the Oricorio. So this Oricorio, and in particular Senso Oricorio, is a really powerful pick when you consider what's on this team. So Oricorio, if you don't know, has the ability Dancer. Dancer is when another dance move is used, then Oricorio just copies the dance move right away, regardless of when it happened on its speed. So looking at it in particular, one thing that immediately jumps out to me is Volcarona. Volcarona has access to Quiver Dance, so setting up a Quiver Dance next to Oricorio is going to give it that stat boost immediately. In addition to that, you also can use Fiery Dance. So Fiery Dance just also goes insane because you proc 2 Fiery Dances. So Oricorio's just out here swinging like crazy next to its dance partner, Volcarona, and that's just a really, really cool niche to occupy that you have to respect. It's a really, really amazing draft for a last pick because you just have this set of dancing pals just going crazy. It's awesome. I love this pick so much for this team, and it just rounds it out so perfectly. Especially when you look at the other synergies like Pikachu and Toadschool, allowing this thing to be protected because it is a flying type, it's weak to electric. So redirecting that damage is going to be immense for that. It's just a really cool synergy pick to see.
Up next, the last pick for the Treasure Town Togepi's was Revavroom, a steel poison type that's new in Gen 9 that hasn't gotten a lot of attention lately. I think it's a really interesting Pokemon. I always wanted a steel poison type, but I wanted them to have Levitate. But this Pokemon gets cool abilities otherwise. Overcoat and Filter are both super useful. Its attack stat is pretty solid. It's got good bulk all around, not to mention a pretty good bulk related typing. Its speed is good. It has a signature move that deals 100 damage and spin out that makes it slower, which honestly for this team that has a quash option and really clear trick room options isn't bad at all. I think this is a really cool steel type, a really smart pick, and the Treasure Town Togepi's are looking stacked.
Our last pick of the entire draft here is Great Tusk. Great Tusk is, honestly, I love this that it became the last one. This is my favorite Paradox Pokemon of this gen, and looking at the team for the Sunbury Stomps, it's perfect for this lineup. We were looking for an Earthquaker. We were like, when is this Earthquaker coming? And he held out to the very last round of picks and was like, okay, I can finally pick this up. I hid it from everybody. I wanted Great Tusk. It's perfect with Tailwind. It's perfect for spamming Earthquake. It's honestly one of the ideal picks for it. It was either this or Garchomp, realistically, and this is a great round 10 when it all comes together into one lineup like this. So Great Tusk, great draft here for Keegan, and I love to see it.
All right, gamers, the draft is done, but we've got a couple more things to talk about. So as we randomly generated the snake draft, we also randomly generated divisions. We have 14 teams, and to do 14 weeks of battles would have just taken a really long time. So we've cut that in half. So we randomly created some battling divisions, and you may have noticed the colors of the slides as we went through the draft. Those with the scarlet backgrounds are in the Naranha division, and those with the purple backgrounds are in the Uva division. These teams will be playing against each other in the regular season, and then the top 4 from each division will move on to playoffs, aka Top Cut. So overall, I really like how these got seeded out, and again, we did this after the draft to avoid interdivision counter picking. Really cool divisions, really excited to see what they can do. That being said, it's time for the 2-scale overall analysis of the complete teams. Garby was just talking about Sudbury Stomp, so I'm going to give my 2 cents. I have to totally agree with Garby. I'm going to be honest, I thought this draft was really like, I don't want to say it was lacking, but something was missing. It was like, it just needs this one thing that I can't put my finger on what it needs. And then round 10, it happened and it all came together. And now it's just this impressive complete unit. And it's just great. It's awesome. It's so funny how much Great Tusk just made that huge difference in this lineup. What do you think about it, Garby?
See the pieces really rounding around Great Tusk before we knew it even came out. You have not just the Earthquake synergy that it has with Earthworm and Kilowattrel, but even things like Lumineon being able to protect it from water moves, and also giving impressive switch-ins to things that it's weak to, like the Skeledirge. It really does have this full, complete package built completely around Great Tusk, and Great Tusk is a great Pokemon to build around. It has a very impressive stat line, and it's one of the best Earthquakers and users of just offensive moves in the entire format. You have access to Headlong Rush, which is just ground close combat. It's like the ideal move for it. It has access to close combat. This thing just hits super hard. It's excellent to build around, and Keegan did an excellent job building it.
For the Treasure Town Togepi's, this is great. It's just a great draft. They picked up Torkoal early and they made the most of it, especially considering Fluttermane. I mean, obviously all past Paradox Pokemon make good use of photosynthesis, but Fluttermane, I feel like in particular, has a lot of good options for it. Aesthetically, the team is nice, and again, Torkoal is just being taken such good use of, and I'm happy that the person that picked up Torkoal is going to be using Drought in every way possible that they can. Not to mention, even without bringing Torkoal to a game, there's still a lot of power here.
Yeah, I don't want to sing my own praises as the Torkoal expert within the server, but I do use this Pokemon a lot, and I couldn't have made a better draft better myself. This thing really capitalizes on, the entire draft really capitalizes on Torkoal as a whole, being able to just get it pivoted in the correct positions and support it in many different ways. Normally people just look at Torkoal as this trick room mon that you have to bolster up that way, but looking at things even like Sableye, you have access to things like Quash in order to stop some of these Pokemon from hitting Torkoal right away and being able to do some crazy damage. And not only outside of that, it's not all just built around Torkoal. So you have these other options going into it, like Sableye plus Toxtricity, an iconic duo from Series 1 that really pops off together, is just an excellent draft overall. And having Torkoal there also as a support option means that you can use other Pokemon like Fluttermane to really do the carrying in some matchups. So it's a great, excellent use of not just Torkoal, but just a great overall package.
I'm going to be honest with the people in the chat. The first 4 picks of the Peachy Pikachu was what I had written down in my notebook as the things I wanted to draft. So seeing Roaring Moon go round 1, I was like, all right, I'm pivoting. That being said, I'm so proud of Liz. I think my backup plans for like after I got those first 4 mons, being Roaring Moon, Volcarona, Magnezone, and Florges, were not as strong as what he ended up doing here. This is just really, really threatening. I think, we're singing praises to Grace having such a smart draft. I think this one's right up there. There's so many synergies here, and there's just so many options, so many things that can mess you up. There's so many things that you have to prep for that aren't going to come, and it's just going to leave your team on the back foot, where the Peachy Pikachu can just build so offensively each week and just decimate their opponents. That's what I think, at least.
Yeah, Kamiata proving themselves to be a funny little guy with all these funny little guy drafts. But truth be told, you hit the nail on the head with it. Just like, I was most impressed at how well this team really utilizes Pikachu in particular. Now, I know Pikachu is a signature Pokemon of Liz in particular, but looking at the other picks, I think Pikachu excellently supports this entire team and really brings it all together. In addition to that, having that Dancer option was a big surprise. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, duh, obvious, but like, at the time, I didn't really think about it until it happened. And that's what makes it such a really smart draft. It's surprising every time you got to a new round. And it was really, really cool to see. It's bonkers and screams crazy synergy, and I love it so much.
The New Jersey Jirachis, our first feature from the Naranja division. Really, really cool draft. Something to note for the 2-scale sizing here. They're all pretty much the same size, which I thought was funny. But other than that, as far as like competitively, really cool stuff. 2 of, hands down, the best fairies getting picked up here. Excellent D-tier choices just to round everything out. Just like this is probably, in my opinion, one of the most well-rounded drafts. There's no insane power that's immediately jumping out, but there's nothing that's exceptionally weak either. There's just so many good options and so many strats and so many things you can do, and I'm really excited for Hey Boy Blue's debut into VGC Draft League.
Yeah, this definitely screams, as you said, very well-rounded. So you have just a lot of options that make it so normally when you look at someone's team, you're like, okay, I have to prep for this particular Pokemon. But I don't think you look at this team and be like, oh, I have to prep for this particular thing. You have to prep for everything, because there's so many little bags of tricks that are going to catch people off guard in this entire league that it could be a shoe-in just round 1 every time for Boy Blue, as long as he plays it correctly. It's going to go crazy because it's so unpredictable, because there's so much like collection of power that really comes together all at once. So once the team building phase starts for them, it's going to be just amazing for them every matchup.
Then there's the Portland Timbers. I think Delibird was my favorite pick in the whole draft, and I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say DJ Sugar didn't necessarily pick it for its viability, but because it's perfect for the team. That being said, I'm sure DJ Sugar considered the things that it can do and found some niches that it can fulfill, which is pretty great. But overall, really solid team. I love all the snow options. I love the ghost types to kind of back it up. And Garchomp just kind of provides a whole new thing that just Garchomp Hawlucha specifically as a combination is just really threatening. And the Portland Timbers are going to wreck some teams in some weeks, I believe.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. Don is definitely one of the smarter team builders, and I have no doubt that he's going to have a bag of tricks for Delibird, of course. But everything else on the team really just is very well-rounded and has some really, really cool options. I'm definitely excited to see what they do with Hawlucha, because you don't pick Hawlucha without a deliberate plan. So I'm definitely just super excited to see what he busts out, because I love Hawlucha so much, and I'm definitely excited to see it in this form of play. In addition to that, I just love mons like Cerule Edge and seeing the Snow Core and like the nice mix of Pokemon that like add these like nice layered degree of threats. It's totally cool. You just gotta really respect a lot of the picks on this team, and it's really cool to see.
The Wyndon Dragapults, our very own Jack Clark, the Golden Cosmos. Love this team. A lot of really powerful options, and Cosmos is a ridiculous battler. Even though we didn't fully finish the season, he is the champion of the BDSP Draft League by merit of going undefeated during the regular season. So that being said, he is the reigning champion. He's going to be trying to get a second victory in the CGC Draft League, and I think this team can probably get him there. Again, I can't point out enough that there's 2 ghost types, there's 2 telepathy mons, and there's just like boom burst. That's just, it's gonna happen. It's just something to prepare for. And the funny thing is that while that strategy is so obvious, there's so many more little strats that are tucked away in this team comp, and I just am really excited to see what Cosmos pulls out each week.
Yeah, Jack really emphasizing the idea of like very obvious synergy to build around, but it can be a bait and switch, as you said. It's something that is kind of unsung, where you look at this and you're like, oh, I already know what's going to happen. And then he bamboozles you with something completely different, because he's just a smart player. And that's how you can get those crazy advantages. There's very obvious things these things can do, and if you're not prepared for them, you could fall to them. But if you over prepare, well, then you get baited into something completely different. It's really cool. And I love to see in this picture that you just put them all on the table. That's so cool.
It had to be done. It had
to be done. Yeah, absolutely.
I know that you're front office on this team, but I'll speak to it a little bit first. I think this is a really exciting, really fun Trick Room team. And of course, it's not dedicated to Trick Room by any means, but the Pelipper, the Pelipper round 1, it was probably going to go round 1, but I just really like what happened here. I know that before Gen 9 started, we were kind of memeing about Rain Room, like, oh, like there's Sun Room, like what about Rain Room? But then it turned out Rain Room's like really good. It might even be better than Sun Room. And I think Farigiraf really helps with this team. Iron Hands is a ridiculous pawn. It's crazy that it went in round 3, honestly. And yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. This is a really, really cool team.
Yeah, again, speaking from this, I'm in the front office of this team. This is probably a team that I would have drafted for myself as well. Me and Mike talked a lot about, do we go Sun Room, do we go Rain Room? I'm a big Trick Room guy. Mike's a big Trick Room guy. We love Trick Room. So building a Trick Room team felt like a no-brainer. But rounding out this, I love that there's so many different options here. And like you said, it's not just dedicated to hard Trick Room. You have so many cool options, especially Pelipper bringing in that Tailwind, meaning that you can like bamboozle someone with like a fast mode if they're not prepared for it. So I think that's a really, really cool option, and there's so many tools to make use of that it's not just one note in Trick Room in particular. Because of all these different layers that there is to it, it's kind of a scary team. So
Then there is the Milk Biting Mousehold. This team is like really diverse, and it has its own little pockets of individual synergy, which I'm a big fan of. I also love how Mousehold feels so central to it, which is kind of why I put Mousehold in the middle. It also is an incredible logo, incredible team name, and all of these pieces like have really unique interactions. You can pick any random 2, and it feels like that they could like do something interesting together, which I think is a really neat aspect of Draft League. And I think Cleffa really drafted really smartly, and I'm excited to see what this team will do.
Yeah, I'm also excited as well. I mean, obviously you see the namesake of the Mousehold, you wonder where they're going to go, but there's so many cool things that Mousehold really props up on this team. I am mostly excited for the Brambleghast, because I know for a fact that if you do wind power and you shift in like Terra Ghost, for example, and just start pelting people with damage, this thing goes really hard as well. So it's really cool to see like these really interesting synergies from pretty unsung Pokemon, especially Brambleghast, and utilizing Mousehold in very unique ways. I'm just really excited to see what crazy plans they bust out. We got the Instruct Eruption strat. We can do some Mousehole with some Rage Fist beat up strats. We got Tailwind plus shotgunning things with Brambleghast. You just have so many layers of different types of cool synergy offense that it can just pop off. It's gonna go really cool.
The Sherwood Berry Bandits, no doubt. Synergy is the name of the game. There's so many things that this team does or has the option to do that is just overwhelmingly powerful and is unique to the mons that are involved. Not to mention, arguably the strongest elemental core. I won't shut up about cores, I promise. I will never. But Arcanine, Palafin, Brute Bonnet is crazy. That's very silly. There's a fast mode, there's a slow mode, there's a lot of things you can do here, and the supports are stacked. By supports, I'm mostly looking at like Stantler, Squawkabilly, Sneasel, Electrode, and in a lot of cases Mimikyu. All of those, like, this might be the strongest overall support piece draft, I think, out of the whole league.
Yeah, we got to emphasize, we looked at all these different synergies and everything like that, and we talked about it to death. But I just really like the chat's popping off about it. I love this logo.
Oh yeah,
this is such an excellent, well-designed logo for what it is. Like I'd never seen the gradient look this hard, like ever. It just never has looked this tough. Yeah. It's crazy to me. Like, this is so good. But yeah, to speak of the team itself, having these crazy, not just like elemental core synergy and everything like that, just like the layers of support that this team offers, in addition to the crazy offense, you probably won't see a better draft that props up Colossal in ever. And like in an entirety of existence. I'm really excited to see Cole really try to return to form and its throne of like being the king of last generation, and now coming in here and not seeing as much play, but definitely a well-deserved niche in a draft league like this, and very good Pokemon to build around.
It's my team, the Colorado Cramorant. I love these guys. As I was saying, this wasn't my original plan, but I just defaulted to Pokemon that I like. I have some sort of experience with all of these Pokemon except for like Pachirisu and Klotzer, and I just like them, and I think that's a big part of making a draft fun, is just things that are cool and good and just are nice. And furthermore, I was obsessed talking about cores all draft. I got the cores, baby. I got the Fantasy Core with Dragapult, Iron Valiant, and Bronzong. I have the Elemental Core with Klotzer, Rotom, and Pyroar. And did I get a Zelda Core? I have Dark, I have Fighting, and I have Psychic. Yeah, so I got all the cores, even though the Zelda Core is a made-up one that no one actually talks about, and it's not actually that strong. But I did it anyways. I love these guys, and I want to know what you have to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking to just like, oh, it's Pokemon that I like, but I think you just created a very well-rounded draft. You have some pretty unsung support Pokemon and things like Vivian and Pachirisu that I think really occupy a very specific niche, but are really strong in their own right. Then you get the option to really catch people off guard with diverse move pools of things like Dragapult and Iron Valiant. So even though you're talking about like, oh, I just have really rounded defensive cores and Pokemon that I like, I think you drafted really smartly as well, because there's a lot of unsung heroes in this draft that I think will come together really nicely as you look at your matchup spread and realize, oh, this core works really well, so I'm going to slot this in. Oh, I have some really surprising moves that I can bust out on literally anybody. And since you're such a creative player, like, you'll make use of those pieces.
Up next, Toronto Tinkaton. I think for someone who has never touched competitive Pokemon, this is a really, really fun draft. I think this is a Titan. I think people would be surprised to see it without a Abomasnow, but I think it works great here. I think Jugs really drafted the tools to make it work. I think Hydreigon was a really killer pickup early, as it's just a really good foil for Titan, I feel like. And I'm a big fan of the Houndoom personally. Amoonguss, super threatening. Amoonguss and Indeedee as two A-tier supports are absurd. Though, like, having those together, you have all the redirection you could ever want, and they're just good for other reasons as well. I think for his first time in the draft league or in any competitive kind of format, Juggernaut HQ is looking very promising.
Yeah, despite the fact, if you told me that it was Jug's first time like doing VGC stuff, I would be really shocked, because Jug's put on a clinic in terms of how you build around a single Pokemon very specifically. So like you said, there's the foil in the Hydreigon, there's the co-star from Flamigo, there's even Ditto to like steal other options from other people. So even though you're building around this one guy, you get the option to utilize your opponent's pieces. And even the support pieces that we have laid out here. You have the Indeedee, you have the Amoonguss, you have Tinkaton, you have Altaria. Like, this is a really scary Titan rounded draft. And I think it added a lot of layered threats to this that I think is really, really great. Like, you wouldn't think of it at first, because you look at all the pieces and you're like, oh, like, these Pokemon individually don't like look too well together. But then you put in the context of what they do with Titan, and that makes it such a smart draft, because you really wanted to build around this Pokemon and you did it. Like, this is the perfect way to do it. But outside of having Abomasnow, like, you couldn't have asked for a better draft for Titan.
The Sydney Sylveons. I am a big fan of Cotton as a person and Cotton as a VGC player, and this is just a Cotton draft. It just is. It's fantastic. It's it's going to be a nightmare to prep for, because you have these impassable walls that you will have to break through. And if you guess Ron, who's coming out on the lead, Rotom's gonna burn you, or Grafia is gonna do something stupid and ruin your day, and Quillfish is going to use Thunderwave or just explode or Destiny Bond. It's just, this draft is a maze to navigate, and it's easily the most powerful defensive draft in my opinion. And even if you have someone with hyper offense like me with like Valiant and Dragapult, it's just such a puzzle. It's such a code to crack, and that just automatically gives Cotton the upper hand in all of the battles that he has.
Yeah, Cotton just playing to those crazy defensive outs. Like, you see it, all the layers of defense. It's going to be so hard to crack. Screamtail is incredibly difficult to take down. Garganackle has been a absolute menace in terms of walls. Like, it's just the layers of defense on this are insane. It's such a Cotton draft, but like, you're hard pressed to really stop them. Like, how do you really like crack that? And that's what everyone's puzzle is going to be to solve, is they have to look at their teams and be like, okay, I need to beat this wall and 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 this wall, and it's gonna be so hard to take down. And then you prepare for breaking all these walls, and then you just lose the slack game.
Yeah.
So like what do you do against that? It's just like, not only behind all these walls, I put a massive cannon, and it's gonna be just like blow you up if you're not careful. So like, it's just it's going to be a nightmare for people facing Cotton, and not just because they're going to be crying as they get stalled out and hit timer, but like because they could also just die to slacking. So it's just like, it's going to be really cool to see.
The Windy City Whimsies. Yes. I do want to reiterate earlier, as we did, that there are 3 returning members from BDSP, which is just so cool. I definitely developed attachment to my old draft that I had, because you're just working with them and they do surprising things, and it's really neat, and I just love that Grace brought them back. But that being said, her Gen 9 pickups are crazy. She brought Tatsudon, Meowscarada, Sandy Shocks, and Palmot. Excuse me? Grace? Jeez. I'm done talking about this.
Yeah. Grache, absolute villain. Pretty much I think Gen 9 might be like near perfect drafting here. Like, especially with the front end of it, it was just crazy. Like, good luck to everybody else for like trying to figure out strategies how to crack this. Like, you got to really dig deep into your move pools to be able to beat Tatsudon. And honestly, shame on everybody for letting this happen, because everyone had the chance and everyone was a coward and didn't want to stop it. But you let it happen, and now Grace is going to punish you for it and reap the rewards. So, good on you.
Even if Tatsudon wasn't here, it would still be terrifying, which is the crazy thing. It's if you're in the UVA division, you're lucky. That's all I gotta say. Last but not least, incredible aesthetic team, the Glimwood Glimmets. Dell, I'm very excited to see what she brings to the table with these pieces, because they all have some layer of nuance. They're all not as obvious as they appear up front, and there's just a lot of, the team building prep is going to be very hard when you're facing up against the Glimwood Glimmets, I think.
I would agree, definitely, especially when you look at like some innate synergies. Like, I think this team actually rounds up really nicely for Glamora in particular. Like, giving a lot of free liberty to Sludge Wave with all like the different resistances that are possible on this, especially with the ghosts and layered poisons, and especially Corviknight. This just builds so much around Glamora that it just like really rounds out. It's another quintessential example of like, hey, this is a really smart draft around these particular picks, and it's okay to build around a particular like type of strategy when something like that can just go wild like that. So having these like layered damage strats in addition to like really cool defensive synergies, like people have to actually like, when they're prepping to face the Glimmets, they're gonna have to like dig deep into like just hop on Cerebi and just read through the move pools, because not only are these pretty underused Pokemon in some respects, they're incredibly powerful and have very interesting move pools that it's gonna be really hard to prep for.
Everyone in chat, thank you so much for joining us for the 3-hour Draft League analysis. If you're not already a member of the Discord and you want to follow the Draft League, that's just what you have to do. You got to join the Discord. All of the updates are going to be there. There's a YouTube channel that's going to have playlists of the matches each week, as well as links to all of the content creators that are involved in this, who are going to be uploading to their own channels and sometimes streaming their matches. Exclamation point Discord in the chat gets you there, but we also have our own URL if you forget, discord.gg/Calyrex. Our week 1 battles will start next week, and the episodes, I mean, they are kind of episodic. The weekly battles will start the week following. So pretty soon in February, we're going to get some intense matches. All of the coaches have been prepping, and we're so excited to show you what we're going to do with these teams. Do you have any parting words to say, Garby?
honestly, I just want to say good luck to all the coaches in particular, because this is just a very exciting process. I know we have a lot of first-time like VGC players or some inexperienced players, and it's just going to be really fun to see them unleash their creative side after this draft and see how they learn and battle and develop over time. Like, we have our VGC veterans, and we're going to see them do pretty well, but I'm definitely excited to see these newcomers and see how they perform and really get that experience and very much more like friendly, exciting, more fun environment than just typical like VGC climbing the ladder doing tournaments. Not to say that that's not a great format to do, and I hope to see that if this is a good experience for them, that they move into that and really get some more exciting experience playing in tournaments and grow as a result of it. But I'm definitely excited for their first foray into VGC doing this.
I think on the spectator end too, especially in doubles formats like VGC, Draft League is something that isn't super celebrated and not a whole lot of people know about it. So just the fact that there's more Draft Leagues happening, really, I think, I'm hoping will show that as a spectator experience, it's thrilling. It's a lot, I mean, it's designed around sports drafts, and it feels a lot the same way. You find a team and you're like, wow, I really like these guys. You follow them, you have matches, you get really invested. It's a lot of fun as a spectator experience, and I'm really excited to be sharing that with more people around this time. So once again, join the Discord. There's going to be lots of information there. There's going to be a schedule where you can see all the upcoming matchups. We have a spreadsheet that's going to go public soon where you can track all the teams and every week all the results. We're going to be tracking stats like KO leader and whatnot. And I think overall, it's just going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really grateful that all of you decided to join us tonight. This video will be available on YouTube on the CGC Draft League channel. You should be able to just search those terms and you'll find it right away. You'll see all of our old BDSP videos from the previous season, and you'll be able to rewatch this analysis whenever you like. I don't have much else to say besides thank you to the viewers, and thank you to Garby for joining me.
Of course. I just want to thank the viewers as well. Thank you so much for joining us. I love doing this kind of analysis work. It's really fun, and I'm so glad that Richie invited me again to do it once more. Even though I'm not playing in this draft league, but I'm still really excited to just be able to give the nice breakdown and insight and analysis to help the viewers kind of understand and contextualize everything. It's just so fun. I love doing this. It's so great.
Yeah, it's a great format, and it takes a lot of work with everyone involved to get it going, and I'm so happy that we're doing it for a second time around. It's going to be a lot of fun. I have nothing else to say. We're going to end this stream, and we hope to see you in the Discord. Have a great night.